The photograph depicted 6 people joyfully smiling at the camera and posing in front of a beautifully decorated Christmas tree. 4 of them were adults, my uncle, aunt, mother and father, and the other 2 were a 10-year-old girl and a 1-year-old baby the young girl lovingly cradled in her arms. Ever since your mother got pregnant, Kylie wouldn't stop rambling about how impatient she was for you to be born. And when that finally happened, she then wanted you to grow up quickly so you could both play together. My aunt explained as I stared at the picture. I had no memories of Kylie, so seeing a picture of myself right alongside her as a baby was fascinating and emotional in a way I can't really put into words. It made me wonder what could have been had it not been for the sudden tragedy that would befall upon my cousin and would devastate the whole family shortly after. Just a week after that cheerful Christmas day of 2005, Kylie would mysteriously go missing one dark and cold January night of 2006, never to be seen or heard from again. As for me, I had since grown into an 18-year-old college student. I had come to stay at my aunt's house for a little bit because it was conveniently located near the college I studied at. After having lunch and chatting with my aunt and uncle, they took me upstairs to show me the room I'd be sleeping in. I recognized that locked door at first sight, Kylie's room. It had remained locked ever since Kylie disappeared, and all my attempts to enter it when I was a kid had resulted in me getting scolded by my mother and aunt. Are you sure you can take it? I can sleep on the couch downstairs. You don't have to do this, I asked my aunt and uncle, knowing what that room meant for them and knowing how they promised themselves to permanently keep that room shut ever since the day they lost Kylie. We've given it a lot of thought. Don't worry about us, Jane. Kylie loved you. It's what she would have wanted, they replied as they slowly opened the door to Kylie's room. My aunt and uncle had cleaned it up a bit the day before my arrival, but for the most part, it looked pretty much identical to how it did the day Kylie vanished. The pink flowery wallpaper that decorated the wall, the shelf filled with toys and children's books, the bed and even the bed sheets were also the same. It almost felt as if Kylie herself had just been there earlier that day, as if time had stopped flowing after she went missing. This room is yours now. Make yourself at home and feel free to call us if you need anything, my aunt and uncle proclaimed before leaving me alone in the room. I spent the remainder of that evening reading a book I had to write an essay about for college. After a couple hours, I decided I had read enough for that day and opened a drawer next to the bed in order to store the book, only to find there already was a book inside that drawer, a very special kind of book. It was considerably smaller than my book from college. Its cover was pink with the title being written in big purple letters that spelled, "My Diary." It didn't take a genius to figure out what this book was and who it most likely used to belong to. I did not hesitate to pick it up and began reading the first page. I was tired of reading the book from college, but how could I say no to the diary of my long-lost cousin? December 25th, 2005. Dear Diary, it's Christmas Day. I've received tons of presents this morning. I knew Santa Claus was proud of me. I've gotten the new Animal Crossing game for my DS, a pair of woolly earmuffs, and this diary. I wanted a doll like the one all the other girls in my class have. There's even a boy who has the doll too, but he told me to keep it a secret. Mommy says I have to be thankful for what I've gotten, and I guess she's right, so not having the doll doesn't bother me that much. Also, my aunt and uncle and baby Jane have visited us, and we've all had lunch together. Baby Jane is the cutest. I promised my aunt I would take care of her just like Mommy took care of me when I was a baby. Reading that first entry made me shed a few tears. I couldn't help it. I could picture the innocent smile on her face as she wrote on her brand new diary that Christmas Day, and the way she talked about me as a baby was so heartwarming it almost made me feel enraged about the fact I knew I had spent time with her but was far too young to remember any of it. December 26, 2005. Dear Diary, what a day. Mommy and Daddy have taken me to a snowy mountain. There were other kids with their parents and we've played together in the snow. It was so much fun. We've made a snowman, and I wanted to give him my earmuffs, but Mommy said I needed them for myself so my ears can stay warm and cozy. I saw another girl with earmuffs and hers were much cuter. They were pink and were shaped like hearts. Mine are just round and red Anyway, the best part of the day was when I found a doll lost in the snow. She looks like an angel. She's not like the doll my friends have, but she's cute, so I've taken her home. And guess what? I've named her Jane, like the baby. That entry made me notice something I had first seen when I entered the room, but I hadn't really paid attention to it until Kylie's diary brought it up. The plush doll that was sitting on Kylie's bed, which was now my bed, I guess. It looked like a traditional angel, with a pair of wings, white robes, and a small halo on its head. I had no doubt about it. This doll had to be the same one mentioned in the diary, which Kylie had named after myself. Kylie wrote that she had found the doll lost on a snowy mountain in late 2005, but it looked to be much older than that. It would have felt right at home in an antique store filled with memorabilia from the Victorian era. Who knows where it had come from and what it had been through before being found by Kylie. I figured that continuing to read the diary would perhaps give me more information about that mysterious doll I shared my name with. December 27, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane cried last night. She was sleeping by my side, and she started crying like a real kid. This morning, I've told Mommy and Daddy, but they believe I'm just playing pretend. But I'm not. I woke up and she wasn't in bed with me. Maybe she didn't want me to pick her up. I tried to cheer her up by bringing her to my friend Sarah's house. We played with our dolls and had a make-believe tea party. Sarah said Jane wasn't as cute as her doll. She said Jane was kinda creepy. I got upset because that made Jane feel sad, so she might cry tonight as well. Thanks a lot, Sarah. That last entry left me utterly baffled. A plethora of conflicting thoughts flooded my mind as I stared at that doll on the bed. No, it simply couldn't be possible. It didn't make rational sense for Kylie's diary entry to be taken literally. Surely it was nothing more than a child with a wild imagination. But still, the sudden tone shift compared to the previous two entries was striking. I had originally planned to sleep with the Jane doll next to me out of respect for Kylie, but after reading her diary, I instead opted to leave it on the shelf with the other toys. It just gave me some bad vibes I didn't quite know how to explain, but I knew there was something about her that felt off, and the fact it was named Jane just like me didn't help either. I woke up in the middle of the night as an odd high-pitched sound broke the silence. I drowsily looked around the bedroom in pitch darkness in hopes of identifying where the sound had come from, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. I wiggled in bed for a couple seconds trying to get in a comfortable position to get back to sleep. It was then when I felt something small and soft touching my arm. The Jane doll. There it was, laying next to me. I vaguely remembered having put her on the shelf before going to sleep, but it was late, and I was pretty tired, so my sleepy brain assumed that I had just imagined leaving her on the shelf and had kept her in bed this whole time. A short while afterwards, I was woken up by sudden noises once again. It sounded like a child was crying. I stood up only to see what looked like a small shadowy figure in the darkness, standing right next to the bed. I also noticed the Jane doll was gone. It wasn't on the bed and it wasn't on the shelf either. I rubbed my eyes thinking this was just what they call a sleep paralysis demon, you know, an imaginary shadowy creature our mind sometimes conjures. When you wake up abruptly and your senses are alert but your mind is still half asleep and misinterprets reality. But those kinds of illusions are normally static and lifeless and only last a couple seconds. No, that shadowy child was something else. I was sure I could hear them weep. I tried to turn on the lights, but they had inexplicably stopped working. The shadowy child lingered in the darkness, sobbing right next to the bed with their hands covering their face. I sat on my bed contemplating them in silence. My brain was still too sleepy and confused to move or react in any other way. Kylie, I faintly uttered the first thing that came to my mind as I slowly tried to process what was going on. Upon hearing my words, the child stopped weeping and put down their hands which had been covering her face. The baby, where is the baby? The child yelled in a voice that resembled that of a little girl. As they lunged themselves towards me, I finally snapped out of my drowsy state as my survival instincts kicked in. I struggled as the child aggressively tried to grab my hair, and I tried to hold her arms. The child kept uttering, I gathered all the strength I could muster and pushed her out of the bed, causing her to tumble to the floor as I screamed in panic. My aunt and uncle came running to my room as I hopped out of bed. "Jane, what's the matter?" they asked worryingly. "The doll disappeared, and then there was a kid, and they attacked me," I shouted in tears as I was trying to make sense of what had just happened. My uncle turned on the lights, and it worked, unlike what had happened when I had tried it earlier. "What doll?" "The one that's over there on the bed. It used to belong to Kylie. You must have had a nightmare. We understand better than anyone it must be emotionally intense for you to sleep in this room, but there's nothing to worry about." My aunt comforted me as I stared in disbelief at the doll, which had somehow reappeared on the bed. The shadowy kid had vanished without a trace. There were only 45 minutes left until 7 a.m., which was the time I usually woke up at, so I decided not to go back to bed and to have breakfast early. My uncle accompanied me to the kitchen with his characteristic limp as my aunt stayed behind. "Calm down, my dear, calm down," I heard my aunt murmur. I initially thought she was talking to me until I noticed her eyes weren't directed towards me, but she instead was looking back at Kylie's room. I brought Kylie's diary with me to college. The last lecture of the day was considered the most boring one by practically the entire class, so plenty of students spent the hour distracting themselves with their computers, playing video games, or checking social media. I opted to spend it reading a few entries of Kylie's diary, desperate to find out more details about my cousin's fate, especially after the terrifying events I had experienced the previous night. December 28, 2005. Dear Diary, I can't believe it. It's happening for real. First of all, I've lost my second milk tooth this morning while I was eating cereal for breakfast. I've put it under my pillow so the tooth fairy can come to pick it up. But I'm also excited for another thing. My aunt and uncle have gone on a trip to another country together and have left baby Jane with us in our house for a few days. I convinced my mommy and daddy to let the baby sleep in my room with me. I'll ask the tooth fairy to bring me something I can give to baby Jane. Also, Jane the doll cried again when mommy and daddy brought baby Jane to my room in her crib. I think she wants me to put her right next to baby Jane, so I'll do that tonight. And the two Janes can sleep together. Isn't that cute? December 29, 2005. Dear Diary, I don't understand what happened last night. Baby Jane wouldn't stop crying. Jane the doll was grabbing the baby's face, and baby Jane started moving her adorable tiny hands and feet because she wanted the doll away from her. I grabbed the doll and told her, "Bad, Jane, bad. Hurting babies is what naughty people do." Mommy and daddy came running to my room to see why baby Jane was crying, and they brought her to their room to sleep with them. Maybe Jane the doll doesn't like baby Jane because they have the same name. I knew I should have named her Annabelle or something like that. My face went pale as I finished reading those two entries. For years, I had believed that Christmas Day of 2005 was the last time Kylie and I had ever spent time together, but apparently I was wrong. I had spent my whole childhood and adolescence asking my family about Kylie, and not even once did they mention that I had spent several days alongside her after Christmas Day right before her disappearance. It was a hard pill to swallow, but the diary confirmed that my family clearly knew more than they were letting out. But to what extent? Thinking about it sent shivers down my spine. But I had to accept it was a factor I needed to take into consideration if I really wanted to get to the bottom of this. "Hey, are you okay? You look concerned," asked Cindy, a classmate of mine who sat right next to me upon seeing my reaction to Kylie's diary. "It's nothing. I'm just reading a thriller novel with lots of suspense," I replied, discreetly putting the diary away so she wouldn't be able to see what I was truly reading. Cindy was really into creepy disappearances and paranormal experiences. One day, she told me a really weird story about a paranormal phenomenon occurring at a daycare, but I didn't really pay attention to her. I contemplated asking her for help in solving the case of my missing cousin and the doll, but I ultimately opted to keep investigating on my own. I didn't want to make this rabbit hole bigger than it already was by bringing in people who had nothing to do with it. I arrived at my uncle's house after college and found myself alone for a while since my aunt An uncle had gone to hang out with several other families they had met at their collective therapy sessions for families who had lost their children. They were especially close with the parents of a little boy named Hugh, as well as the parents of a teenage girl named Molly, both of whom had gone missing a few years earlier than Kylie in some incident I don't know much about. My aunt and uncle had left lunch prepared for me, so I ate on my own and thought about what I would do later that night. Since I didn't want to sleep with that Jane doll again, I figured reading more of Kylie's diary would give me a solution. December 30th, 2005. Dear Diary, Jane the doll is behaving very badly since baby Jane came to our house. I told my mommy and daddy about it, but they still don't believe that a doll is able to do all these things. Baby Jane sleeps in their room now, but Jane the doll is still causing trouble. Baby Jane and I were having a nap after lunch, but I was in my bedroom and she was in mommy and daddy's bedroom while they were in the living room. Jane the doll was in my room at first, but then I fell asleep for a little while and she wasn't there when I woke up. I ran to my mommy and daddy's room, and Jane the doll was in baby Jane's crib and her hands were covering baby Jane's mouth so she couldn't cry. I grabbed Jane the doll and tossed her to the floor. Tonight I'll bring baby Jane to my room and leave Jane the doll with my parents while they're asleep. They'll get mad at me, but I don't care. I must protect baby Jane. I was astonished. The experience with the Jane doll I had the previous night made it clear to me it was best to stay away from it, but I never could have imagined it had been after me since I was a literal baby, and Kylie caught on eventually and did her best to keep me safe. I had no doubt that accursed doll was responsible for whatever had happened to her. It was then when I noticed there was only one last entry of the diary left to read. I eagerly turned the page in order to find out what secrets could Kylie's last entry hold. January 2nd, 2006. Dear Diary, the baby. Where is the baby? Did the doll take the baby? Did Jane take Kylie? The baby is not with me. Protect the baby. Kylie must protect the baby. Kylie is here. Jane is here. But where is the baby? Kylie will always protect the baby. Always. If the previous entries had impressed me, this last one simply left me speechless to a point I cannot describe with words. The things Kylie had written up to that point had described outlandish situations, sure, but the events they narrated at least maintained a certain degree of cohesion and structure. In contrast, this last entry didn't really narrate any events at all, and instead seemed like the ramblings of someone who had gone mad and was in the middle of having a mental breakdown. It was hard to believe a little girl who had once been so innocent and cheerful could have written something like this, but its disturbing content wasn't the only thing that felt off about this last entry. The date, it was supposedly written in January 2nd of 2006, but the previous entry was dated December 30th of 2005. What happened between those two dates? It was apparent a couple of pages had been removed, but by who? Just when I was starting to theorize about the mysterious last diary entry and the pair of missing entries, my aunt and uncle arrived home. For that night, I decided to follow Kylie's plan and get the Jane doll away from my room by putting her in the attic. I also locked my bedroom's door for good measure. I was woken up in the middle of the night once again. Only this time, it wasn't because of something coming from inside the bedroom, but from the outside. I could have sworn I had heard the attic's door opening at the other side of the hallway. Multiple taps, footsteps. Someone was coming to my bedroom. It didn't take long before they knocked on the door. "Who's there?" I uttered, but received no response. They kept knocking again and again, growing more and more impatient until what had started as normal knocking turned into aggressive banging. I lay on my bed horrified as the entity at the other side of the door began to whisper some familiar words. "The baby," a little girl's voice repeatedly uttered. I had no doubt it was the same shadowy child from the previous night. More taps. All of a sudden, the sound of footsteps echoed across the hallway once again. Someone else was heading to the bedroom. I felt shivers going down my spine as the sound of rattling keys was followed by the slow and eerie creaking of my bedroom's door. Whoever they were, it was evident that second individual had come to open the door for the shadowy child. For Kylie, I frantically hid under the bed as the door opened and the outline of the two individuals became barely visible in the dark hallway right in front of the bedroom. Kylie stepped inside the bedroom as the other individual who was much taller, began to walk away with a very familiar limp. "You won't take her away," Kylie murmured, as she aimlessly roamed around the bedroom. I had tried to talk to her last time, and that had only resulted in her attacking me, so I opted to keep silent under the bed. After several minutes of roaming the bedroom filled with confusion and anger, Kylie crouched and crawled under the bed. My heart was racing as I thought she had found my hiding spot and was coming for me, but to my surprise, she curled into a ball and began weeping, seemingly unaware of my presence just a few inches away. I held my breath as well as the tears that were flowing from my eyes, trying not to make a sound as I slowly wiggled away from Kylie, who was still quietly sobbing in a corner. Slowly but surely, I began emerging from under the bed. The upper half of my body had made it out, but I was still struggling with my legs and feet. Thump, my face went pale as I felt my right foot hitting one of the bed's legs. Kylie yelled as she reached out with her arms to try and drag me back under the bed. She tried to get a hold of my feet, but by that point I had stopped trying to be stealthy. I stood up and quickly sprinted out of the bedroom as I could see Kylie's blurry silhouette crawling from under the bed. "Jane, what's wrong? Why aren't you in your room?" my aunt and uncle exclaimed in confusion as I ran to their bedroom. "You know what's going on," I replied in a combination of anger and fear. "What are you talking about? Shouldn't you be asleep? You have to get up early to go to college tomorrow," they said, continuing to act clueless. "I'm talking about Kylie. I can hardly believe it myself, but Kylie's still in there, and that creepy doll of hers has something to do with it. Jane, we get that Kylie's disappearance has affected you ever since you were a child. We're the first ones who wish we could see her again. We also sometimes imagine that she's still with us, but we have to face the truth and press on. We can't let our lives be consumed by grief. You're tired. You should really go back to sleep. We can talk about this tomorrow if you need to, okay?" my aunt uttered in a soft, motherly voice as she hugged me. Seeing how trying to talk to them was futile, I ended up doing what they told me and going back to sleep, but not to Kylie's bedroom. I spent the remainder of that night sleeping on the couch downstairs. My aunt, my uncle, and I ate breakfast gathered around the table in the kitchen, with all three of us eating in silence. Even if you had been a stranger randomly stumbling into the kitchen without the slightest idea of who we were or what was going on, you would have still been able to sense the palpable tension between us pretty clearly. As I finished eating my toast, I took a deep breath before finally deciding to break the ice. "We need to talk. We need to talk about Kylie," I uttered. We returned to staring at each other silently for a couple seconds before my aunt responded. "Sure, honey. If only Kylie could see you all grown up," she said as she shed a few tears. "We can talk about what happened if that's what you want, even though I'm not sure what we can tell you that you didn't already know," my uncle added. "Then why didn't you tell me about the fact I was there?" I stoutly asked. Once again, they stayed silent. Judging by their stare, it was clear they were not expecting that question. "I was there the week Kylie vanished. My parents were on a trip and I stayed at your house as a baby alongside Kylie. I know this because I found her old diary in her room. I've read it all except for a few pages that are missing. Why did no one in my family ever tell me about this?" I continued my interrogation, raising my voice to make it clear I was not joking around. "You were just a baby. We thought that learning about it would be too traumatic for you, and since you had no memories of it anyways, we figured it would be best to omit that detail," my uncle answered once they realized I was going to stop at nothing to find out the truth. "But I'm not a baby anymore. I have the right to find out what truly happened, and that fact you call a detail is much more than that. Kylie wrote about the time she spent with me. She wrote about that doll that she named after myself. I don't know how or why, but that thing wants something from me. It has wanted something from me ever since I was a baby, and Kylie knew and tried to protect me." "Hold on, Jane, you're taking this too far. Are you suggesting that a simple doll is responsible for my daughter's disappearance?" my aunt asked. "I'm not suggesting it, I'm sure of it. And Kylie, she might not be the same, but she's not entirely gone. That doll has gotten a hold of her. I've seen her. I've seen firsthand what happens in her room every night," I exclaimed. "Look at the time. You'd better get going or else you'll be late to college," my uncle said as he forcefully put an end to the conversation. "Wait, You can't keep the truth away from me, I protested, but it was no use. My aunt and uncle refused to keep talking and practically dragged me outside of the house. I skipped the last 2 lectures of college and returned to my uncle's home earlier than usual. As I expected, my aunt and uncle hadn't arrived home yet. Great, that gave me some time to continue investigating without being disturbed. It had become evident that my aunt and uncle weren't too fond of me looking into Kylie's disappearance and finding out about things that were never intended for me to know about. That accursed Jane doll was the one behind everything. I had no doubt about it, no matter how much my aunt and uncle tried to deny it. I'm gonna be honest, after what happened on my first night spent sleeping in Kylie's room, I originally thought that the Jane doll was haunted by Kylie, but while that assumption turned to be partially correct, I was now sure it wasn't the whole picture. Yes, it had become apparent that Kylie's spirit had somehow become attached to that doll, but Kylie herself wasn't the one in control. The doll was the one pulling the strings, holding Kylie against her will. Indeed, Kylie's diary confirmed that the doll was already alive before Kylie disappeared, or rather, before the doll took her over. If I wanted all of this to end, I had to destroy that damn doll. I climbed the staircase and confidently marched towards Kylie's bedroom, ready to grab that Jane doll, bring her to the fireplace in the living room and letting her be consumed by the flames. But as I stepped foot inside the room, I realized that the doll was not there, and not only that, but there were no signs of Kylie's diary either. After scouring Kylie's room in search of the doll and the diary without success, I headed across the hallway to the first place that came to my mind, my uncle and aunt's bedroom. There was nothing of importance under the bed, or at their nightstand, or inside their multiple drawers and closets, but I knew they had to be somewhere in that room. Where else could they possibly be? Who else could have been interested in hiding the doll and the diary away from me, especially after I had explicitly told them I had an interest in those artifacts earlier? That morning, I swung open a large wardrobe. At first glance, it seemed to serve no other purpose than to store my aunt's extensive collection of fur coats and scarves. But upon closer inspection, it became clear that there was something else. A small object discreetly tucked at the bottom of the wardrobe, hidden behind the dense row of bulky clothes. I stretched my arms and pulled the mysterious object out of the wardrobe, revealing a dusty wooden box. I opened it without hesitation, smiling of satisfaction as I glanced at its contents. The Jane doll, Kylie's diary, and something else. A pair of pages with something written on them which looked all too familiar. December 31st, 2005. Dear Diary, I've done it. It's the last day of the year, and me and baby Jane will be spending it together. I don't care about what mommy and daddy say. I've locked myself in my room with baby Jane right after having dinner, but we're not going to sleep. She's supposed to be at mommy and daddy's room, but I've swapped her for Jane the doll so I can protect her. Baby Jane makes it hard to focus on writing this because she's sitting on my lap right now being the cutest thing I've ever seen. She just smiled at me. Focus, Kylie, focus. So anyways, Jane the doll is at mommy and daddy's room, but I know she'll try to come for us tonight. That's why I've locked the door. I will not let her harm baby Jane, no matter what. January 1st, 2006. Dear Diary, it's early in the morning. Baby Jane and I are doing our best to hold out. Jane the doll has been trying to get in for hours. All I can hear is banging and more banging. It's so loud it makes poor baby Jane cry, but mommy and daddy are still sleeping in their room. Don't be afraid, baby Jane. If that doll wants to get you, she'll have to go through the door first. And if she manages to do that, she'll have to go through me. Wait, the banging has stopped. I can hear Jane the doll going away. Yes, she's going back to mommy and daddy's room. Wait, I forgot there were more keys in mommy and daddy's room. Before I had enough time to process those 2 diary entries, I was shaken by the sound of footsteps. It sounded like someone was climbing the stairs. I tried to put everything inside the box and to hide it away at the last second, but I was too late. My aunt and uncle walked into the room, catching me off guard. We expected you'd find this eventually. I guess there's no need to keep pretending at this point. It's best for us to tell you everything so we can start getting things done, my uncle said in a serious tone. Yes, forgive us, Jane. But we have to. It told us it's the only way, my aunt added as she pointed at the doll. What are you talking about? What do you want to do? I asked as my body started trembling in fear. You see, when that doll took our daughter that fateful January night over 17 years ago, the one it was truly after was you. But Kylie would stop at nothing to protect you, and she put herself in between you and the doll. And so, the doll seized our beloved child, holding her spirit hostage for years, to the point she lost the ability to think rationally, and is now just angry and confused, eternally seeking to fulfill a purpose she's unaware that she already accomplished. But the doll always made us know that she was willing to give us back our daughter in exchange for the child it actually wanted, my aunt explained in tears as she picked the doll up. You can't trust that thing. Don't you see it's manipulating you? I replied, but my aunt and uncle no longer listened to reason. We could have done this years ago, but we couldn't bring ourselves to do it when you were still a child. But after all those years spent knowing that our poor daughter was suffering every single day without us being able to do anything about it, we realized there was no other choice, my uncle said, as he began advancing towards me. His limp gave me time to back away. But there wasn't anything else I could do. My uncle grabbed me by the neck and immobilized me as I helplessly struggled to liberate myself. Forgive us, Jane. Forgive us, he uttered as I slowly lost consciousness. As I gradually came to my senses, I glanced at the Jane doll, which was sitting on the floor mere inches away from my face as a blurry figure materialized right next to it. Tylee. My parents watched in awe from a few feet away as I broke into tears, never having cried so hard in my entire life. It was then when something snapped in Kylie as she heard my tears. The baby, Tylee yelled as she grabbed the Jane doll with rage and began ripping it apart. She then walked towards me, gently wiping away my tears with her hands. Baby Jane, she whispered, our daughter is back. My aunt and uncle uttered in awe. But Kylie turned back and approached my uncle visibly enraged. My uncle and aunt were so shocked by that reaction they were initially going to hug her, but decided to slowly back away. What's the matter, dear? They asked. But Kylie responded by aggressively lunging herself at the one she caught up to first, my uncle, who tripped and fell down the stairs, hitting his head and dying instantly. My aunt, overwhelmed by the current situation, attempted to jump down the balcony to end it all. But I was able to intercept her and retain her in the bedroom until the police arrived. Kylie and I hugged each other in a long embrace that felt so intense and emotional it was almost as if we were trying to make up for all the hugs we missed when I was growing up. You're not a baby anymore. I like that, Kylie murmured before finally fading away. After my aunt got arrested for having assaulted me and held me hostage, the house was emptied out and sold to another family. Kylie's diary was the only thing I managed to keep for myself. Hey, how was your day? I've heard about what happened with your aunt and uncle, Cindy asked. Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm glad this mess has been resolved once and for all, I replied as I was trying to follow the teacher's lecture. It was then when I saw two of my classmates checking something on a computer. It was a listing for an old doll that was being sold online. It was in very bad shape and looked to have been crudely sewn back together and reassembled with stitches. The listing read, Jane the doll, warning, vintage doll found at a crime scene said to have been haunted. Buy at your own risk. I was struggling to find the energy to get out of bed when I heard Mom call. Alex? Billy? Breakfast is ready. It jolted me wide awake. A question blared in my mind. Who's Billy? I heard footsteps tumbling down the hallway, coupled with a "Coming, Mom," in a high-pitched voice utterly foreign to me. Who said that? I tossed aside my blanket and dropped into my slippers. Before making my way out of the room, I flew through the corridor and halfway down the staircase when it caught my eye. Of the several pictures of the family spanning the years, The newest changed. Weeks ago, we went snowboarding at a ski resort for my birthday. We took a photo at the top of the mountain with me, Mom, Dad. But now, someone else, a perfect stranger, stood between Dad and I. He wore a white jacket and blue pants, smiling with a mess of gold hair also shrouding his orange goggles, and his gray board planted in the ground. "Thanks, Mom," said that strange voice again. "You're welcome." I crept down the stairs around the corner, and there he sat. The boy from the photos, right about to stuff his face with scrambled eggs. His hair seemed to sparkle in the sunlight. When he stared up at me with those charcoal eyes. "Good morning, Alex." He flashed me with a pearly white smile. This was the prettiest kid I've ever seen. If it weren't for the name, I'd have thought he was a girl. "Mom, who is he?" "Very funny, Alex. Come get your plate." "Mom," I said, struggling to keep my voice from trembling. Why is there a stranger in our house?" She blew up at me. "Alex, he's our family, your brother, and you will not address him that way again, do you understand?" I was shocked. She'd never yelled at me before. Ever. I was at a loss for words. I just nodded sheepishly. "Apologize." I turned to Billy. He peered up at me with this wounded puppy dog look that made my stomach knot. But this guy just spawned out of thin air. How was I supposed to react? "I'm sorry, Billy." "It's okay. I forgive you." Billy chatted in my ear all the way to the bus stop. I tried my best to feign interest while desperately reaching out to my friends Jacob and Riley. "How well do you think you did on last week's test? It was pretty tough, and I know math isn't your strong suit." "Oh, fine. I did alright, I think." "You know, Alex, if you have any problems, I'd be happy to help you out." I sent a group text. "We need to talk in person. Meet me at lunch behind the portables." "Who are you texting?" My heart skipped a beat. "It's nothing, just Jacob and Riley. Talking about some stupid bad movie, you know." He laughed. "Yeah, sounds like them." The bus pulled up and the doors parted to a cacophonous chatter of children. Minutes before class began, Billy started talking up several students around him. They spoke with a familiarity hinting at weeks of friendship. It made my skin crawl. How does anyone know this absolute stranger? The teacher took attendance and didn't bat an eye at the new addition to our numbers. For the next 3 classes, the same song and dance. He walks in, everyone knows him. They talk and laugh, nobody realizes how weird it all is. I couldn't take it anymore. Finally, the bell rang and I moved for the halls. I exited the side of the building and made my way around the back to the blue portables near the soccer field. Riley was sitting on the steps. She waved me over. "Hey, what's up? I got your cryptic message. What's going on?" I looked around for Jacob. "Riley, something really weird's happening. I feel like I'm losing my mind. I woke up this morning and this Billy kid just appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be my brother when I don't even know him. I've never seen him in my life, but Mom and all my classmates are acting like he's been here all year. I'm getting really freaked out." Riley's brow furrowed. Then she chuckled. "Look at you go, my little actor. If you can pull that opening night, you're seriously gonna crush the play." "Riley, I'm not acting. I really don't know him." There was a pause. She shook her head, squinting at me. "What are you talking about? Your parents adopted him 2 months ago. He's your brother, dude. I thought you liked him." I palmed my forehead, suddenly feeling dizzy. "Riley," I muttered. Did you hit your head or?
Greetings, plebeians. It is I, your Lord and Savior. Who dares summon me?
Jacob yelled, waving his hands about as he approached. And past his animated arms, Billy followed close behind, flashing those pearly whites. I gritted my teeth. I could feel the bile rising in the back of my throat. Alex, you okay? Riley asked. I took off for school and didn't look back. Jacob called out,
Hey, where you going? I thought you wanted to talk.
I hid in the bathroom and bawled my eyes out. For what must have been a half hour, this intruder, whoever he is, burrowed into my life and has everyone I know wrapped around his finger like a bandage. It's unnatural, it's not right. It's like everyone trying to pull some sick prank on me. I pulled myself together and washed up, before heading to the next class by the time the bell rang. The bus ride home was torture, just sitting there listening to these kids talk to somebody that shouldn't exist. It was breaking my brain. When I got home, I locked myself in my room. I tossed my bag by my desk and collapsed in my chair. How did this happen, I wondered. I thought back to the night before, but I couldn't peg anything out of the ordinary. I had school, drama practice, came home, worked on my essay, showered, slept, woke up, and then he was here. That's all there was to it. Dad came home in time for dinner. It was stupid of me, but I hoped that at least he would be able to see the elephant in the room. That he'd question it, pull Mom aside, something. But no.
Good evening, everyone,
he said before kissing Mom, hugging me, and rustling Billy's hair. I felt like screaming. I'm not feeling too good. I'm going to bed, I say before departing the table.
Whoa, was it something I said?
Dad asked.
But you didn't even finish breakfast.
I walked past my room straight into Billy's. What should have been the beige, bare-boned guest room was now a vibrant blue with rolling clouds artfully painted across the four walls. I checked the closet and dresser drawer beneath a giant chocolate brown mirror, but they're both filled with teen-sized clothes. Everything seemed as if he'd been here months ago, like Riley said. What are you doing in my room? Billy asked. You don't have a room, I thought. What are you doing in my house? What? Who are you? I'm your brother. No, you're not. He sighed and shook his head. I thought it couldn't get any worse. The next morning, Alex, Billy, breakfast. I could hear his footsteps outside the guest room. They paused at my door, then continued down the stairs. I made my way out of the room and through the corridor. Halfway down the stairs, several things caught my eye. He was in every picture, every single one, even my baby photo. I had to force myself to breathe. What is this? How is this possible? I yanked a frame from the wall with my clammy hands and removed the photograph. I poked and prodded at every inch of it, hoping for something to fall off and reveal the real picture underneath. Then I realized that this was it. I hung it back on the wall and made my way to the living room. Billy looked up at me tentatively. Good morning, brother. Sorry about yesterday. I was out of hand, I said. A smile flickered across his face. No, it's okay. I warmed up to him. We talked all the way to the bus stop about school, plans for the weekend, movies. We laughed and smiled until my cheeks hurt. One thought echoing in my skull through it all. He has to go tonight. Classes blew by. I didn't even notice when the lunch bell rang, until Billy asked me if I was okay. I ignored him. You're adopted, right? I said. There was a moment of silence. Billy laughed. What are you talking about? We're twins, idiot. I didn't take the bus home. I just walked by myself. Riley and Jacob were blowing up my phone. Where are you? Did something happen? Alex, you're gonna miss practice. What's gotten into you? I left them unanswered. Whatever's happening, whatever he's doing, I don't think it's gonna stop. If being adopted wasn't enough for this thing, what'll it do tomorrow? Or the day after that? And why am I the only one unaffected? What could I do? Kill it. I heard a voice from the bottom of my heart cut through the noise in my head. Kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it, kill it. I came home an hour later than usual, but Mom didn't seem to mind much. Good evening, Alex. How was school? Perfectly fine. I headed for my room and tried to decompress. He waltzes into my home, leeches off us, and I'm just supposed to be cool with it. Everything in me is just screaming to drive this imposter as far away from us as possible. I've never seen him stressed out for a single moment these last 2 days. Every time I look at his perfect face, nothing but that dumb smile. He's just so comfortable, so snug, warping reality. He thinks he's in complete control. He knows he's in control, but not for long. Dinner time, Billy passed by as I headed out into the hall. I followed him to the stairs. I thought about pushing him down, but even the elderly survived that, and his hand was clasping the rail. I took my seat at the table. We said our prayers and started eating. I struggled to hold it down. I could use a knife, I thought. If I hit his jugular, he's done. My hands started to shake, and I could feel my throat tightening. Alex, you okay? He asked. Why can't you just leave me alone for 5 minutes? Alex, what's gotten into you? Mom jumped in. That's no way to talk to your brother. I palmed my head. What's gotten into this house, I thought. That isn't your son. How can you not see that? I get up from the table and dump dinner into the trash. Don't walk away when I'm talking to you. I drop my plate and fork in the sink and take my leave. Alex! I locked myself in my room and I waited. Billy finished dinner and he came to a stop outside my door. Knock knock. Can I come in? At your own peril, I replied, fiddling with the dinner knife. The door creaked open as I slipped the blade down my sleeve. Look, if I said something that upset you, I apologize. I don't want any bad blood between us. Should have thought of that before you brainwashed everyone I know into gaslighting me. No, I shouldn't have blown up at you like that. It's just a lot on my mind. And the school play and classes. Please, don't take it personally. I'm just not myself lately. He smiled. You know you can talk to me if there's anything wrong. So you keep telling me. We laughed. We cool? He extended a hand. Yeah. I shook it, then we hugged it out. You're dead. It was such a strange feeling. Hugging someone you're gonna end so soon after. This must have been how Macbeth felt before slaying Duncan. Is this a dagger which I see before me, the handle towards my hand? Dad just pulled into the driveway. I'm waiting for everyone to fall asleep before I make my move. These'll probably be the longest hours of my life. $10 million. They say everybody has a price, and that was apparently mine. That's what it took for me to abandon all ethics, caution, and respect for human life. It wasn't worth it, not even close. Mr. Minkowski sat across from me, my cluttered office desk between us. I want you to fix my son, he said, looking me directly in the eyes. It was silly, but I felt like I was back on the schoolyard 40 years ago, getting stared down by the class bully just before he pants me. I shook my childish intimidation away. Mr. Minkowski was a billionaire, but he was still just a man, and he was in my office, not the other way around. And what's wrong with your son? I asked. What isn't wrong with him? For starters, he's a goddamn runt. Asthma and big glasses, and buck teeth and you name it. Okay, so you'd think the kid would at least be smart, right? You know, he's no good at sports, not a chance with the girls. So you'd think he'd bury his big ass, crooked nose in books, maybe get into computer programming, stuff like that. You'd be wrong. He's as dumb as a brick, barely knows his multiplication table, 8th grade reading level. He's 15 years old, Doc. I shifted in my seat. I presume he has some disorder that makes him a candidate for gene therapy. That's the thing, Doc, Mr. Minkowski said, keeping his eyes locked on mine. We've had him tested. And tested. There's nothing wrong with him, other than the asthma and every damn allergy known to man. There's nothing wrong with him, and there's everything wrong with him. You see, he just ended up with all the bad genes, that's all. He got unlucky, but you know what? When you've got the money that I've got, luck doesn't mean as much. That's where you come in. I'm sorry that you wasted a trip down, Mr. Minkowski, but if your son doesn't have any disorder that's been approved for gene therapy, I'm afraid. Not talking about ordinary gene therapy, Doc. I'm talking GTCA, final phase, CRISPR. I frowned. How do you know about final phase? Mr. Minkowski smiled. Oh, I see. You think because it's a top secret government project, I couldn't possibly know about it. Doc, I am the government. Nothing happens in this country that I don't at least know about. And most of the time, it happens because I say it happens. So I want you to put my idiot son in the CRISPR, or however the hell you do it, and I really don't care how you do it, Doc, and fix him. Change all of his genes to the good ones. That's not how it works, I said, looking down at my desk. His stare had become unbearable. In certain cases, simple Mendelian diseases. Well, that is the entire goal of the project. We could possibly do something for your son, even at his age. But what you're talking about complex, polygenic traits that we're not even close to understanding. Cut the bullshit, Doc. I've read the articles. You think I haven't done my research? That I'm an idiot, like my subnormal son. You guys have found hundreds of IQ genes, hundreds of height genes. I'm not asking for a super genius NBA star. I know you haven't found them all yet, but you've found enough to make a difference. I lifted my eyes and returned his gaze. I'm afraid that you're mistaken, Mr. Minkowski. There have been numerous genome-wide studies that, yes, find statistically significant associations between certain variants and phenotype outcomes. I want to stress that word, associations. As far as we know, there is absolutely no causal relationship between these variants and the outcomes. Well, it's the best shot I got for fixing my embarrassment of a son, so I want you to go ahead and do it. You're not listening, sir. We don't know what will happen if we start messing with thousands of variants in your son's genetic code. We are not even close to understanding what exactly the function of these variants are, or how they interact with others. $10 million, said Mr. Minkowski. That's just for you, Doc. I'll cover whatever other expenses there are, of course. $10 million damn dollars. You got that. That's a chunk of change, even for me, but I figure the ROI is gonna be pretty high. This little runt is going to bankrupt me and blow the family fortune unless you fix him. I know it. The mention of $10 million had made me lightheaded. Still, I kept my composure. You understand that there is absolutely no way to tell what will happen to your son if we do this. The most likely outcome, I'm afraid, is that he will not come back alive from the procedure. I'm okay with that, he said. And don't worry about if something goes wrong. I'll have my lawyers draw something up, absolving you of all responsibility. I know there's some risks, But Jesus Christ, Doc, once you see this little runt, you'll understand. He's worthless. I gotta try to fix him. It's my fatherly duty. In retrospect, it is clear to me that Devin Minkowski did not have the mental acuity to consent to the procedures. Of course he didn't. Even if his IQ had been considerably higher, what 15-year-old boy can wrap his brain around the complexity of his genetic code? Most adults can't do that. Nevertheless, when Devin agreed to the procedure, saying that he just wanted me to fix what was wrong with him, and he didn't care if he died, I told myself that he was willingly consenting. The money had bound and gagged my conscience, which should have been screaming in horror at the atrocity I was about to commit. Instead, I told myself that I have a family to think about too, and if the child wants the procedure, despite the risks, then I am doing a clear good. It is incredible how easy it is to rationalize away the worst actions. The treatments went on for a year, and on the last day of them, I hid away in the bathroom and cried tears of relief that Devin had made it through alive. I knew that we weren't out of the woods yet, but that he had survived in the first place did wonders to relieve whatever was left of my conscience. I dried my eyes and returned to my office, where Mr. Minkowski was waiting for me. Gotta say, Doc, part of me wonders, did you even do anything, or have you been putting me on this whole time? Kid still looks exactly the same, still dumb as a sack of flour. So tell me right now, and I'll know if you're full of it. You've been jerking me around. I assure you, Mr. Minkowski, the procedure was a success, from my end. You can easily compare Devin's before and after SNPs and see for yourself. As I told you from the start, the outcome of this procedure would be completely unknown. It was always quite possible, as I have explained, that there would be no observable change in Devin. If there is a change, it is likely to take some time to manifest. DNA, as you know, is instruction and not completed construction. I just wasted $20 million, didn't I? Said Mr. Minkowski, frowning. Nothing happened. God damn it. Oh, how I wish that nothing had happened. At his 1-month checkup, it was apparent that Devin's hair was growing lighter, from a deep red to a rusty blonde. Freckles were disappearing from his face. By month 2, his vision was growing sharper, and he needed a weaker prescription. By the 3rd month, he had grown 4 inches taller, and was now able to wear contact lenses. His hair was completely blonde, and most of his freckles were gone. It went on, and on like this. His asthma cleared up. His grades improved dramatically. He kept growing taller, and came to have 20/20 vision. Somehow, his teeth even straightened out. I was amazed, and Mr. Minkowski was delighted. We convinced ourselves, over a $3,000 bottle of scotch, that we had made the most important scientific breakthrough in the history of mankind. No more disease, no more maladies, no more stupid people, as he put it. The possibilities were incredible to imagine. But still, there was the smallest part of me that would not let me rest easy. That part shut up completely when Mr. Minkowski announced that he was giving me a $5 million bonus. You earned it, Doc. Goddamn miracle worker. And who knows how many millions, billions. You saved me in bailing the kid out of trouble. So take it, and take ownership of this. I know we're still a few years out from when you can tell the world, but once you do, you're gonna be a legend, Doc. I smiled, my head light from the scotch, the money, and the feeling of success. I felt like a legend. I sat in my office, with Devin Minkowski across from me. It was the last of his monthly checkups. After that, he was to see me once a year. I was amazed at how completely he had been transformed in the course of a year. It was as though the Devin sitting across from me now was a completely different Devin than the one that I had seen a year ago. He retained only a few traces of his former phenotypes. You must be relieved, Doctor, said Devin in his now deep, soothing voice. His stutter was completely gone. Oh, I'll miss seeing you every month. Devin, that's not what I mean. I mean, you must be relieved that you didn't murder me. You know as well as I do that that was always the most likely outcome, given our present knowledge of genetics. Are you not happy with the procedure, Devin? It's funny, the one thing that hasn't changed about me is my memory. I still remember everything in that crude, impressionistic manner in which I used to experience life. I remember the day that I met you, how scared I was, but overpowering that fear was hope. Hope that if I did this, my father would finally love me. Devin laughed, and you know what? It worked. He loves me. He's proud of me. And it's all because of you, Doctor. I smiled. In a few years, Devin, we'll tell the world about you. Then it won't just be your father that loves you. The entire world will. Devin returned the smile. That will be nice. But listen, I want to thank you. Formally, I want to do something special for you. That's hardly necessary. Oh, I've been planning it for a month. Here, he said, reaching down onto my desk for a pen and a pad. He wrote down an address in perfect handwriting. This is our house. Be here at 6 p.m. tonight, okay? Please bring your family. You have a wife and a son of your own, right? Please bring them. Don't eat anything beforehand. It's going to be very special. That sounds great, Devin. We'll be there. By 6:30 that evening, we were all seated at the Minkowskis' massive dining table. Devin walked around the table, pouring out a dark red wine into our glasses. Mom, he asked, standing in front of his own place setting. It's okay, right? Just one glass, in celebration. Oh, I suppose, said Mrs. Minkowski. Just one though, Devin. And Doctor, you wouldn't leave your son out of the toast, would you? Please, Dad, said my son. I nodded and Devin poured the wine in and then went back to his seat. A toast, said Devin, holding up his glass, to scientific progress and to the good doctor. Cheers, said Mr. Minkowski. I smiled as we all clinked glasses and then I had a sip. I cooked dinner myself, said Devin. We have chefs, you know, but I dismissed them for the night. It's amazing, really. Even cooking has a genetic element to it. I don't know what it is exactly, but I can tell you that last year, well, I could hardly assemble a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It smells delicious, said my wife. He really is amazing, said Mrs. Minkowski. Now, Mother, said Devin. He really is amazing now, you mean. And before, well, before I was a piece of garbage. Isn't that right, Mom? Devin, said Mr. Minkowski. You should all probably take a deep breath and enjoy this moment, said Devin. In a few seconds, the tranquilizers will hit. Maybe you can feel them already. Oh no, Doctor, there goes your son. I looked over as my son's head dropped, his face slamming down onto the table. I began to stand up, my heart pounding, but then it hit me too. I awoke unable to move or close my eyes. I was sitting in a theater, staring up at a screen, which projected my own image back to me. I was bound to one of the chairs, my eyelids taped open. A device positioned above my head dropped water into my eyeballs every few seconds. There was a gag tied around the back of my head and stuffed into my mouth. The image on the screen was live footage from the camera strapped to Devin's head. Devin was standing on the floor below the screen. To one side were 4 people, also bound and gagged. My son, my wife, and Mr. and Mrs. Minkowski. To the other side was a table with a tray of surgical tools on it. I struggled to cry out, but it was no use. Ah, the good doctor is awake, boomed Devin's voice over the loudspeakers. He was talking into a headset. I watched as he walked over to the table and picked something up. On the screen, I could see what he saw. It was a scalpel. Devin picked it up and turned his head so that the image on the screen was my son. Tears were streaming down his face. My son's head grew larger on the screen as Devin approached. Then it filled the entire screen. I watched helplessly as the scalpel caressed my son's cheek. Devin pressed it down until a spot of blood appeared. I've been studying your family, Doctor, while you slept, and here is what I've observed. Your wife, she has a truly beautiful face, but let's be honest, she's grown a little flabby down below. Meanwhile, your son's face is a bit smashed, but what a body, so athletic, like a lean and hungry animal. So I'm standing here looking at them, and it hits me, what if I cut off her head and sew it on his body? The camera, which had been alternating between my wife and my son, swung out back towards me, and on the screen, I saw myself pale and sweating. No, I screamed uselessly in my head. Please no. So I was getting ready to go ahead with the procedure. Have a nice little surprise waiting for you, Doctor, when you woke up, but then something else hits me. A real messed up question. If it's her head on his body, then who is it? Her, him, or something else entirely? Devin looked again from my wife to my son, their faces expressions of total horror. Speaking of messed up people, said Devin. Turning to his father, Mr. Minkowski's face appeared on the screen, trembling as much as the restraints would allow. This guy, Who is he? Is he my father? I don't know. If we went on Murray and they ran the test, what would they find? Probably that he's not my father, but he feels like my father. The man I loved for the first 15 years of my life. The man who never loved me back. But you know what? Now that he finally does love me, I don't love him. I don't want it to feel like he's my father, so I need to make a change. And I'm standing here thinking, what's the defining feature of my father? What can I change that will make him not be my father? And I've got it. The camera slowly panned down Mr. Minkowski's body until it reached the crotch of his pants, which was saturated with urine. It's his big balls, said Devin. That's his defining feature. It's what he himself always attributed his success to. His big balls. I tried to turn my head away. I tried to close my eyes. I felt dizzy and tried to make myself unconscious. None of it worked, and as I unavoidably watched Devin perform surgery on his father, I tried not to vomit, but that didn't work either. Bile leaked out around my gag and dripped down my chin. Devin worked mercifully quickly, as though this 16-year-old boy had been a skilled surgeon his entire life, and began cauterizing the wound. His work finished, he stood up and looked again at Mr. Minkowski's face, which was now unconscious from pain and shock. So how do I feel? Well, it still feels like this asshole is my father. We're going to have to try something else, doctor. But what? Devin turned back to me and began walking up the theater aisle until my own face filled the screen. I know, he said, the camera gazing into my eyes. If I can't escape my father, then I want him to look like he really is. My mother too. I want you to turn them into pigs, doctor. Legit, oinking, filthy pigs, with snouts and everything. But keep their memories in there, like you did with me. You can do that, right, doctor? Devin traced the bloody scalpel over my cheek, and for a moment I prayed that he would get it over with and slit my throat. But he didn't. He moved it down and cut away my gag. I coughed the bile out of my mouth and took a deep breath. Doctor, he said, tell me you can do that. It wouldn't work, I gasped. I have faith in you, said Devin. Just look at what you did to me. It's impossible, I tried to explain. With you, I just switched around some variants, all within existing human parameters. But I can't put a human being inside of a pig's body. You can, said Devin, and you will. If you ever want to see your family again, I'm going to take them with me. They'll be well provided for, don't worry. In fact, they may never want to come back. But doctor, if you mess up, they die. Do you understand? Yes, that's a good doctor. I'll be taking my parents with me as well. You let me know when you're ready for them. I imagine you have some research to do, but don't take too long. No, it would be very bad if you took too long. You have a year. It's been 8 months, and all I have to show for it is a sickening pile of dead mice. Once, I thought that I had gotten one of them to grow a snout, but it turned out that I had merely created a new, deadly inflammatory disease. I am at the end of my rope, and near the end of my funds. My desperation has brought me to this forum. An internet search led me to a story here about a man encountering a giant chicken man that turned out to be, for reasons that I won't get into, a dead end. But as I read more stories here, I realized that people have encountered all sorts of amazing things. I am open to anything. A scientist out of the mainstream who has maybe been performing some unnatural experiments. A witch with a spell to turn the Minkowskis into pigs. A deal with the devil, even. Anything. I know that I am responsible for this ungodly situation, and I do not deserve sympathy, but my family is innocent. Please, if you know of anything that might help them out of this, let me know. A couple of nights ago, I attempted to make a chicken cashew dish. I skimped on the ingredients and didn't plan the timing very well while I was cooking. I was rewarded with a mess that was both mushy and tough and wholly inedible. A couple of years ago, I edited a few thousand nucleotides out of the billions in Devin Minkowski's genome, recklessly risking his life. My motives were purely selfish, and what emerged from the procedure was a violent psychopath, focused on exacting revenge on his father for not loving him for what he was before. What comes out is a function of what goes in. I say this as a scientist and a human being. We reap what we sow. Thank you to all who read my previous post, and to those who offered solutions to my problem. I read them all and appreciate the thought that went into them. Many of the suggestions were all but impossible to follow through with, but the people making them couldn't have known that because I did a poor job of properly explaining the situation. For 8 months, Devin watched me. He had some kind of surveillance on me no matter where I went. And in our communications, he would constantly remind me of this by dropping some mundane detail of something that I had done that day. How was the Cobb salad, doctor? Meanwhile, I had no idea where Devin or my family was holed up. The fact of Devin's surveillance alone cut off many of my options. Even without that particular imbalance, Devin held untold advantages over me in the form of billions of dollars and the personal connections that come with those dollars. To give a small example, the one time that I met with Devin in person at a cafe, he brought along 2 bodyguards. I also know, or at least strongly suspect, that Devin had many high-level officials and professionals in his pocket. If not, then how did the fictional boating accident that killed Devin's parents so easily become a fact? I do want to mention one suggestion that I saw appear often in the comments, namely that I should modify my own genes in order to make myself more intelligent. I had toyed with this idea near the start of this nightmare, but abandoned it for a few different reasons. First, it would take too long. Second, I already possessed most of the variants that I had edited into Devin's code, and so was unlikely to see a massive improvement. Still, after I read these comments, I revisited the idea. I opened up Devin's case file again and spent several hours poring over it. Maybe there had been one tweak which had made a dramatic, rapid difference, and maybe it was one that I could make him myself. As I was looking through the file, which included a series of photographs, I marveled again at how completely different Devin had grown in the course of a year. Almost nothing about him was the same. And then, there in my house, which felt both empty without my family and intruded upon by the hidden surveillance equipment, I had a realization. Almost nothing about Devin was the same. That meant that some things were. 2 days ago, I received a message from a man named Elias Khan, telling me that he had found a solution to my problem. He wanted to make me an offer. The message directed me to a post on r/nosleep, which can be found here. My curiosity grew to excitement. As I read Elias' post, he appeared to be an experienced biologist. Maybe he had found a way to successfully graft pig appendages onto humans, and maybe this would be acceptable to Devin. It sounds terrible that I was excited about the prospect of grafting a pig's nose and ears onto a human head, but you have to understand the alternatives. It was better than actually turning the Minkowskis wholesale into pigs, and it was certainly better than the murder of my wife and son. As I read on, my stomach dropped. Elias was no biologist, at least not in an ordinary sense. He was into some dark and horrible stuff. I read in horror as Elias described drugging his assistant, performing some sort of unholy ritual, and turning her into a monstrous, deformed swine. I thought of that poor woman, screaming, trapped in the body of a pig, and picked up my phone to call the police. This is what you asked for, I thought, putting the phone back down on my desk. You did this. I got up, dizzy, and poured myself a scotch. Then I took a long shower, thinking about what I was going to do. I just wanted it to be over with. I just wanted my family back. I dried myself off, and then messaged Devin with a link to Elias Khan's post. Even after my shower, I felt dirty and hungry. I hadn't been taking care of myself since that terrible day at the Minkowski Theater. When Devin abducted my family, I decided that I needed my strength to do what I was about to do, but when I looked through the cupboard, there was no food there. Devin called me while I was in the supermarket, picking out a chicken breast for dinner. This might work, doctor. He said, I need to put eyes on it, make sure it's real. Finish up your shopping, and then head home. There will be a package there for you. Message this Mr. Khan and set up a meeting. I already know his address. It's only a 5-hour drive for you. I would prefer if you could make it there tonight. If the pig checks out, I can book you a hotel nearby and be on a plane and in the area by morning. I am just as anxious to have this done and over with as you must be. My father's whining has grown intolerable. Any questions? What if he's a serial killer? I asked, as a woman pushed her cart by me, staring. She could have been one of Devin's agents, or she could have just been startled by the flash of the conversation she heard. What happens if I go there, on your behalf, and I'm murdered? What happens to my family, it's in their best interest that you stay alive, doctor, and mine. That's part of what the package is for. You're prepared to pay the price he's asking. I don't know what that is yet, I said. Does it matter? No, I said, and hung up. I checked my list. All that was left was the garlic, cashews, and honey. I had to buy a whole jar of honey for one dish. I decided to skip the honey. Maybe that's what ruined it. When I got home, the package wasn't on my front steps. It was sitting on my living room couch. Inside were 2 items, a pair of eyeglasses and a pistol. The glasses came with some simple instructions. They had a camera in them. It looked as though, rather than Devin spying on me, I would be doing the spying for him this time. I messaged Elias Khan, telling him that I wanted to meet tonight, and to verify that the ritual was legitimate and not just a hocus-pocus show. As I was cooking dinner, my phone notified me of Elias's response. My esteemed Dr. Lewis, I am delighted that you are interested in pursuing a relationship. I have no commitments upon this dark and delving evening, and would be well pleased to more formally make your acquaintance. He gave me his address. I wrote back that I would be there in several hours, and so it was arranged. As I was communicating with Elias, the garlic burned. The dish was a disaster. I arrived at Khan's estate just after midnight, the gun tucked into my waist, and the glasses hooked over my ears. I approached a wide set of gates, flanked by 2 torches with yellow flame dancing in the moonless night. The gates swung slowly open with a long creak, and I drove on until I reached a massive stone building, faintly lit by more torches. I stepped out of the car and heard all manner of chirping and grunting coming from behind his house. That's right, I thought, trying to let my rational brain push down the fear. He said that he has a private zoo. I approached a large wooden door with an iron knocker in the shape of a crow. I shuddered as I grasped the cold metal and knocked. No one answered. I kept knocking, banging harder and harder, the sound filling the night. At last the door swung open, and there was Elias Khan, looking every bit as evil as I had imagined him. Dr. Lewis, he said in a thin, barely audible voice, you must excuse me. I am not as quick on my feet as I once was, and, as you know, my assistant has recently taken a leave of absence. My stomach tightened, but I held my composure. Let me see her, I said. Of course. Come in. I stepped in and looked around. The walls and the floor were constructed of stone, as was the winding staircase to the 2nd floor. Sconces holding lit candles lined the walls, except where there were bookcases, overflowing with thick and ancient tomes. Follow me, Dr. Lewis. We walked around the corner to a wooden door, behind which was another set of stone stairs heading down. As soon as Elias pushed the door open, I heard it, a woman whimpering in anguish and despair. I shivered and followed Elias as he took a torch from the wall and walked down the steps. A faint, unpleasant smell grew stronger as we descended. It smelled like a pig pen. Then we were on a dirt floor. I could only see for the few feet illuminated by Elias's torch, but I could hear the horrible noises growing louder. Then I saw it. The hooves first, cracked and crooked, and then a sinewy leg, and finally the torso of the beast. 6 pairs of human female breasts hung from its heaving pig belly. I couldn't hold back and vomited on the dirt. Elias let out a soft chuckle. Are you satisfied? He asked. I steeled myself and took the torch from him, holding it up to the thing's whimpering face. There, behind a bloated pig's nose, were 2 human eyes, full of human tears, full of human pain. Can you turn her back? I asked. The flower fades to make fruit, the fruit rots to make earth. Out of the mother and through the spring exultances, ripeness and decadence, and home to the mother. She will turn back, Dr. Lewis, in her own fashion. I pulled out my phone and typed a message to Devin. Do you see? I got an immediate reply. Good, I will be there in the morning. I am sorry, I said to the beast. I pulled the gun from my waist and cocked it. I saw the flickering flame reflected in the creature's eyes, and I thought, a flash of relief. With a trembling hand, I fired a bullet into its head, and it dropped away into the darkness as my ears rang from the shot. Now we shall discuss terms, said Elias, taking the torch from me and turning back to the stairs. He led us up and into a kitchen where there was a wooden table and ancient, non-electric appliances. Sit, he said, indicating a chair. I looked around. There was a window on one wall, I'd rather stand, thank you, I said, leaning up against it. Oh, to be a young stallion once again, said Elias, sitting down and groaning softly as he did so. What is the price? I asked, crossing my hands behind my back. My masters have become very keen on you and your methods. They request your services. Who are your masters? Should you accept, you will come to know them, said Elias. What services do they request? Whatever is required. You are to be their employee for 20 years' time. If you choose to leave after the hourglass has run its course, you are free to do so. However, none have so chosen yet. Whatever is required, I asked. Do I get to live at home with my family? As you may have observed, I am currently in need of assistance around my house. This is where you will begin your apprenticeship. You will live with me. My heart was pounding. My wife, I thought, my son, I'm doing this for them, and that's it. My family isn't involved at all. Not in the least, said Elias, waving his liver-spotted hand through the air. Rather, your old family will not be involved. You will come to think of us as a new family, Dr. Lewis. I promise you. All right, I said, reaching up into my right sleeve behind my back. Excellent, said Elias. The contract is all drawn up. You merely need to sign it. I pulled the plastic baggie out of my sleeve. Not yet, I said. It's not you. It's on my end. Before I sign anything, I want to see my family. Here in front of me, I sprinkled some dust on the windowsill. I understand, said Elias, flashing an unsettling grin. You do not trust the younger Minkowski. That is quite wise of you. I suspect that his hatred is pure, and he will be quite eager to do the deed and make the exchange. However, we will wait. We'll be here tomorrow. If he brings my wife and my boy, I'll sign the contract. Tomorrow then, said Elias. I would see you out myself, but I am not as sprightly as once before, you understand. I can see myself out, I said, wiping the last of the dust from my hands. The next day, I was back at Elias's kitchen table, this time sitting. Elias was at the wood stove brewing up some tea. I decided that I wasn't going to have any. I looked out the window, which was beginning to fog up with condensation, and saw an SUV pull into the driveway. I watched as two large men exited. Devin's bodyguards. One of them opened a door that Devin Minkowski stepped out of, while the other began roughly pulling passengers out. First came Mr. Minkowski, then Mrs. Minkowski, both with their hands bound behind their backs. I stood up and wiped the condensation off the window, and peered out as another passenger was yanked from the SUV. It was my wife. I hadn't seen her in 8 months. She was beautiful and terrified. My son followed behind her. I watched as one of Devin's bodyguards tied them to a tree, its branches swaying in the cold wind. I met the rest of the party at the front door. You see, Doctor, said Devin, smiling, I've brought your family. Once the transformation is complete, they are free. You have my word. What the hell is going on, Doc? Asked Mr. Minkowski. The little runt will not say. Hal, said Devin, nodding to one of his bodyguards. I believe that the doctor has a pistol on him. Would you do me a favor and pat him down? Hal patted me down and found the gun. He pulled it from my waist and finished searching me. Fair enough, I said. Follow me. I led the procession into the kitchen. We all took a seat at the table except the two hired thugs, who remained standing. Are you prepared to sign? Dr. Lewis? Asked Elias, sliding parchment across the table with a hand trembling from old age. What the hell, Doc? Said Mr. Minkowski. You're screwing me, aren't you? I make you a rich man, and this is the thanks I get. He's going to turn you into. I began. No, shouted Devin, slamming his hand on the table. He will not ruin the surprise. Turn us into what? Asked Mrs. Minkowski, sobbing. Will you sign? Asked Elias. A line of sweat ran down my forehead. Damn it, I said. It's hot. That stove. All these people here. It's too much. I can't think. Can we open a window? Devin shrugged. Hal, he said to the bodyguard who was standing next to the window. Open the window. Hal reached to lift the window. It's stuck, he said. Come on, I groaned. It's so hot. You have to bang it, said Elias. Hal drove his palm up and the window jiggled, giving a hint of opening. Then he did it again, and the window shot up and open. A puff of dust flew through the air. I looked at Devin and watched as his eyes grew wide in amazement. He struggled to breathe, but no breath came. He began to bang his hand on the table. The room broke into chaos as Hal drew his gun and pointed it at everyone in turn. The other bodyguard rushed to Devin and tried to apply the Heimlich. Even if he had done it properly, it would have been useless. Devin was experiencing anaphylaxis due to his cashew allergy. As Devin's face started to swell, he stopped thrashing and turned to look at me. I returned his gaze. "I'm sorry," I tried to say with my eyes. "Truly, I am sorry." And then Devin sent a message of his own with his eyes. "Screw you," it said. "Last night, as my wife slept next to me, I had the first of what are sure to be many nightmares. I was standing in a corner watching. Devin, as he was before the procedures, was holding out a single flower to his father. Mr. Minkowski slapped Devin's hand away, and Devin began crying. I opened an ancient book, written in a foreign language, and began reading from it. Devin screamed, and then transformed into a hideous pig, similar to the one I saw in Elias's basement. I walked over and stabbed it in the throat, blood gushing into my face. I awoke screaming, "We reap what we sow." I'm not sure how much longer I have left to write this. Karen is staring, and quite frankly, she's the office ass kisser, so there's no telling how long I have before she tattles on me to the boss. So I'll just cut to the chase. I work for a public relations agency in Boston, Massachusetts. Don't Google it, you are not going to be able to find it anyway. That's kind of the whole point of public relations. We are doing our job correctly if you have no idea we exist. We handle brand management, media relations, crisis control, and social media campaigns for a whole buttload of companies, which means I'm usually too busy to glare out the window in the middle of the afternoon on a Tuesday. But I just happened to glance over at 2:32 p.m. And boom, there it was, the perfect view of the office across the street. But I'll get to that. See, I was just promoted to vice president. It was a title that came along with a nice little pay bump and an even nicer corner office. My company is located on the 13th floor, so I have a sweeping view of the city, which also means that I have a view into the office across the street from us. Like most Boston buildings, it's pretty old from what I can tell. It's made up of brick and steel with large, shiny windows stretched between aged brick. But the people, now that's what caught my eye. There I had been, just minding my own business on a conference call, sipping a coffee, when a flash of color spurted across my peripheral vision. I turned to look out the window just in time to see a mousy, middle-aged woman slap a tall woman across the face. I paused, my mouth hanging wide open, as I watched the tall coworker sob openly. Her hand pressed against her swollen cheek. The red flower in her hair crumpled to the ground. "Kate, are you still there?" The phone buzzed in my ear. "Oh right, yes. Sorry," I mumbled. The analytics report suggests that we should push for more ad spend. We believe that would increase consumer engagement. I'm not sure if the client will go for that, my boss said in my ear. "We can bring it up on our next call," I said hesitantly, my eyes still trained on the office across the street. The mousy woman was now confronting another coworker, a man. He seemed to be in his late 30s with peppered hair and tan skin. His hand was on the tall woman's lower back, comforting her. The mousy woman had her finger in his face, wriggling it out of anger. "Was that a wedding ring?" Yeah, that has to be. Is she married to the man? Then what is he doing comforting the tall girl?" My boss continued, "And if we have it by Friday, then we can beat the press release. Right? Kate, right?" I mumbled, still distracted. "I'll take care of it." I turned back to the office window, but the three figures were gone, replaced by a darkened office. How did they get out of there so quickly? "Awesome, Kate. Well then, that's your action item." The phone chirped. Of course, I agreed. I felt dazed, almost as if I was waking up from a dream. I hung up the phone and pressed my cool palm to my eyes. I blinked and took a sip of coffee, glancing back towards the office window. It was still dark, almost pitch black despite the midday sun. I willfully turned away and focused on the press release due on Friday. By the end of the day, I had forgotten all about the peculiar scene from the office across the street. The only reminder was the strange, blooming red flower that appeared in my dreams that night. It blossomed and withered over and over again. The next morning, I came in with a bagel and a double espresso, prepared to tackle the mountain of tasks I had for the day. But when I sat down at my desk, I had the strangest notion that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up and I shivered, unable to shake the gnawing feeling that something was wrong. I turned to look at the office across the street, expecting to see some kind of fight or brawl or something. Instead, I saw only deep, unflinching darkness, which was weirdly worse than the slap I saw yesterday. But why was the office still dark? It was 9 a.m. People should be in the office by now. But whatever, not my problem if they were a lazy bunch. A few hours ticked by until it was the midday slump. I yawned and stretched at my desk, swiveling my chair around to the window. The office across the street was now lit up and there were people moving. Well, two figures in particular. The tall woman, the woman who was slapped the other day, was meeting with the man whose wife did the slapping. She was perched on the edge of his desk, a red dress riding up her thigh. He was leaning towards her, smiling and twirling a pen in between his fingers. Immediately, I moved closer to the window. It was pretty obvious what these two were up to, and you could kiss my sweet ass if you think I'd miss what was about to go down. The man was gently rubbing her thigh, all the while maintaining eye contact with the sheet of paper he had in front of him. The girl was playing coy too, leaning forward slightly to point out something on the paper. Her boobs bounced near his flushed cheek. Even from this distance, I could make out the photo of him and his mousy wife on their wedding day propped on his desk. Figures. I guess the man was done with being coy because he took his hand and slid it all the way up the girl's tight dress, pulling her panties off in one quick motion. And the next thing I knew, I was basically watching an adult film. Jesus, how those two could do it. He took her right there on the desk. To hell with paperwork. Their passionate lovemaking sent his briefcase, coffee mug, and papers flying to the floor. Even the photo of his doting wife was smacked to the ground by the girl's right thigh as he pumped his way into her from behind. When they were done, they neatly picked up the paperwork and spilled office items and rearranged them on the desk. The photo was the only causality. The glass had cracked on impact. The girl was just pulling her dress down when the mousy woman knocked on the door. I was shook. This was the kind of drama people paid for, and here I was receiving it for free. I practically had my face glued to the window. From my viewpoint, I could see the corner office, his office, and the adjacent room next to his. The room was filled with a few desks and your typical office artwork. Nothing that stood out as exceptionally noteworthy. Though I'm sure the office must have been filled at this point, I could only make out these two rooms, separated by a thin brick wall. The mousy woman knocked again. The girl and man quickly sat across from each other as if they didn't just finish screwing each other's brains out. The man straightened his tie, and the girl combed her hair with her fingers. The man must have said something out loud because the mousy woman entered his office. Her bright smile dissipated the second she saw that he wasn't alone. I guess she could feel the sexual tension, or something, because she turned on her heel and slammed the door. The man pitifully called out to her, "Kate, what on earth are you still doing here?" I whipped my chair around to see my boss, Andrea, in the doorway of my office. She was clutching her work bag and had a look of concern splattered across her face. "What do you mean?" I stammered. "It's 10:02 p.m., she shot back. Sure enough, it was. The office was dark around me, and the city was lulling itself to sleep beneath me. I noticed a searing pounding behind my eyes, and my mouth felt uncomfortably dry. How long was I watching that office for? "Is everything all right?" Andrea asked, shifting her tone to one of worry. "I only came back this late because I forgot my phone." "Wow," I stammered. "Yeah, everything is fine. I'm sorry, I guess I just lost track of time." My feeble excuse died slowly on my lips. "Well, alright then," she said hesitantly, turning away. "We have a week off next week, you know. You'll have plenty of time to rest while we renovate the office." "Of course," I mumbled. "Just, holler if you need me, okay?" she said as she turned to leave. The aching in my head was almost debilitating. I rubbed my eyes and took a sip of my nearly empty latte. I could have sworn that I didn't even look over at the office until 2:30 or so, and the scene I saw couldn't have lasted longer than 20 minutes. So how on earth did I lose nearly 8 hours? I packed my bag quickly and shut down my computer, keeping my eyes turned pointedly away from the office across the street. But as I turned off my office light, I couldn't help but sneak a look. I really wish I hadn't. They all stood there, the mousy woman, the tall girl, and the man. They were facing the window and smiling, their lips curled in an unnaturally large grin. The corners of their mouths almost reached the tips of their eyelids, making it appear as if their faces were split in two. Their teeth looked jagged and yellow. They waved in unison as the lights in their office turned off, shoving them into darkness one by one. I swear I could still see the whites of their eyes gleam through the window, unblinking and unmoving. I didn't sleep well that night. I had feverish dreams of shifting shapes and bright lights that left my head pounding in tune to my heartbeat. I woke up at various times imagining that someone was choking me, only to discover that my sweat-stained sheets had wrapped themselves around my neck during a fitful sleep. I drifted in and out of consciousness until my alarm blared me awake at 7 a.m., forcing me to rise on shaky feet. I dreaded going into work. Part of me wanted to call out sick and claim I got the flu, but I had a mountain load of work that I never got to finish yesterday, and an ever-intimidating press release that I had to finish before Friday. So I wearily got ready and headed into the office. "You don't look so good," Gary commented the second I walked through the door. He was the office gossip, and he played the part well. "I'm fine, Gary," I said, brushing him off. "I just didn't sleep well last night." "Please," he said, rolling his eyes. "It looks like you haven't slept well for weeks." Anger flared in my chest. "What does it matter to you what I look like? I'm not dressing up for your sake," I spat. Gary's eyes widened, and I noticed that a few other coworkers had peeked their heads out from their cubicles, their faces blank and blurry. My face felt flushed and hot under their gaze. "I didn't mean to offend you," Gary said quietly, as if to calm a wild animal. "You're never like this. Are you okay?" I averted my gaze. "I'm sorry, I guess I'm just really tired," I stammered as I brushed past him. I could feel everyone's eyes on me as I retreated to my office. I locked the door and leaned against it, closing my eyes to regain composure. I was just stressed, that's all. That had to be it. The pressure of the promotion was getting to my head. Once the week is over, I'll feel better. I took a deep breath and sat down at my desk, keeping my eyes trained away from the window. The guilt sunk in. I was such a dick to Gary. He really didn't deserve me yelling at him, especially over something so little. I quickly started drafting an apology email to him. "Hey Gary, I'm really sorry about earlier. I guess I've just been feeling pretty run down this week. I didn't mean to snap at you." I paused, my fingers suspended over the keyboard. Gary had been here for ages. He was a constant figure in the office, always hovering, always listening. If there was drama happening, Gary would know about it, which means he may know about the office across the street, or know someone who does. "Hey Gary, I'm really sorry about earlier. I guess I've just been feeling pretty run down and distracted this week. I didn't mean to snap at you. I feel like I just can't get the office across the street out of my mind. Do you remember who used to sit in my office before me? I bet they were distracted by the drama happening in the office across from us. Maybe they can suggest blinders or something." From Kate, I sent the email and took a sip of water. I was cheery and yet apologetic. Hopefully Gary would accept my apology and move on. But just as I was getting up to head to the bathroom, a reply came in. "Hey Kate, yeah, totally fine, I get the workday blues too. But I'm not sure if anyone told you, but Mary used to sit in your office. Maybe you could ask HR for an office change." Gary, I froze, dread seeping into my veins. Mary used to sit in my chair. Mary used to type on my keyboard. Mary used to gaze out of the same window, into the same view across the street. Mary killed herself 3 years ago. The news had spread like wildfire across the office. I was an executive then, just starting to really get my foot in the door. I was still learning faces and names when the word came out that a vice president had gone up to the roof, stripped herself naked, and flung herself across the concrete barrier, plummeting to her death stories below. Apparently, she had told a passing coworker that she had to get to them. There was no explanation given, just a few closed door meetings, and an HR email that claimed we should always seek out help if we were suffering from depression or stress. We talked about it around the water cooler for a little bit until, like everyone else, we moved on, and now I sat at her desk. I had her view. I turned hesitantly to the office across the street hoping, praying that I would see only darkness. Instead, I saw them. The man was at his desk, typing away. He seemed happier for some reason, almost jubilant. On his desk stood an uncracked photo of himself and his mousy wife. I was surprised that he was able to get the photo frame fixed so quickly after his sexy bout with the tall girl just yesterday. On the other side of the wall stood his mousy wife. She looked younger than she had the day before. She looked happy. Just then the tall girl entered the frame. She was wearing a tight, white dress that flared at the bottom and black stiletto heels. She was carrying a box full of papers and desk plants. She paused as she entered the room and then smiled at the mousy woman. The mousy woman shook the tall girl's hand and showed her to a clean, pristine desk. It was as if it was her first day. My heartbeat quickened. She couldn't be new. She just screwed the boss yesterday. She was slapped the day before that. There's no way she's new. These people obviously knew her. They simply had to. The boss came out of his office and walked right up to the tall girl, extending his hand. She shook it with a feeble shyness, smiling down at her heels. Even from this distance, I could see the blush creep up her neck. My phone rung loudly in my ear, disrupting my train of thought. I felt nauseous now, as if I was coming down with something. "Hello," I answered. "Kate," Andrea's voice clipped back at me. "You're 10 minutes late to the conference call. We are all waiting for you." A headache pounded beneath my eyeballs. The call was at 3 p.m. It was 9:30, or 10 a.m. at the latest. I had only just sat down, but then I noticed the clock on my computer. Its black numbers were unmistakable. 3:10 p.m. "I'm so sorry, Andrea," I murmured quickly. "I just lost the conference number. I'm dialing in now." "Okay, please do." I dialed in and pressed the phone to my ear, glancing quickly back at the window across the street. They were all still there, frozen in time. The boss had his hand outstretched, his fingers brushing the blushing tall woman. The mousy woman looked on, her neck stiff and her feet squared. Every few seconds they twitched slightly, as if they were in a video game experiencing a never-ending glitch. Over and over and over again. The nightmares were worse than the night before. This time they were filled with swirling dresses and red, blooming flowers that withered and died in rotting eyeballs. Blood clotted on lips, fluorescent lights flashed and shattered, spraying glass on threadbare carpet. I awoke in a pool of my own sweat, feeling feverish and weak. But it was Friday. If I could just make it through today, it would all be better. At least, that's what I told myself as I drove into the office white-knuckled and shaking. The office was quiet when I arrived, or rather hushed. It was as if someone had stuffed cotton balls into my ear canals. Everything seemed softer, muffled, blurry. Indistinguishable faces waved hello from shadowy cubicles. I headed into my corner office and shut the door, immediately turning my attention to the office across the street. At first there was only deep, unflinching darkness, but then, as if they knew I was watching, the lights turned on. It was apparent that much time had passed. The man was seated in his office, his hands drumming along his keyboard. I noticed he wasn't wearing his wedding ring. His hair was a bit grayer, and he had a slight frown on his face. The photo of him and his wife was cracked once more, shoved off in the corner of his desk. Forgotten and dusty, he appeared to be under stress, looking up at the clock above the doorway, and then visibly biting his lip. "Not yet, not yet." I could almost hear him speak. The mousy woman was in the attached room, gently tapping her pen on her bottom lip. It left dark, blue smudges. She didn't wear her wedding ring either. She kept glancing at her watch around her pudgy wrist, sighing with each peek. "Close, close." I could almost hear her whisper. The tall girl entered the office just then, putting her bag down lightly on her desk chair. It was only when she took off her jacket that my breath caught in my throat. She was pregnant. She was at least 8 months pregnant. She placed one hand gently on her swollen stomach, nodding politely at the mousy woman. The tall girl was wearing a black dress with a vibrant red scarf. It matched her lip color. Mesmerized, I moved closer to the window. The mousy woman moved closer to her. It's time, it's time. The mousy woman lunged at the tall girl, completely taking her by surprise. In her hand was a large, shining knife that she had grabbed from under her keyboard. The mousy woman plunged it into the girl's stomach repeatedly, each stab making a sickening plop. The tall girl shrieked, her hands moving down to protect her bleeding abdomen, but it was no use. The mousy girl kept stabbing, and stabbing and stabbing, her hands painted a violent red. The man must have heard the commotion, because he had entered the room in a heartbeat, his eyes scanning the damage. The tall girl had now sunk into the floor, her dress ripped and raw. One hand clutched her swollen and bleeding stomach, the other reached out for the man. The mousy woman just stared, her feet square. Please, help this time. I could almost hear her beg. This time, this time. He stepped over the pooling blood, his hands outstretched to her. She smiled weakly, reaching back out to him, but he didn't grab her hand. No, he grabbed her scarf. With both hands, he yanked the scarf until it was tight around her throat. Her eyes were first painted with shock, then despair. He pulled tighter and tighter as she feebly tried to loosen the scarf that was now her noose. And then she was still. Her body slumped onto the office carpet, her head rolling onto her shoulder. Her eyes watched me, blank and still. The man and the mousy woman stared at her body for a while, until they were staring at me, their smiles creeping larger across their blood-splattered cheeks. I pounced for the phone, my fingers typing out 911 in jerky, frantic motions. 911, what's your emergency? A smooth voice answered. I want to report a murder at 535 Boylston Street. A pregnant woman was just stabbed. I don't think she's alive anymore. Oh, Kate, the operator cooed. Of course she's not alive anymore. No human could survive 37 stab wounds to the abdomen. My blood ran cold. You don't. I didn't tell you my name, I answered back stupidly. Oh, poor little Kate, the voice hissed in my ear. You never had to. You always call on Fridays. I tore the phone from my ear and threw it across my desk. It crashed limply to the floor, the dial tone ringing and ringing in my ear. My heart was pumping so furiously, I thought it would explode right out of my chest. I looked back at the office across the street, terror boiling in my veins. The tall girl was perched on the man's desk, her red dress riding up her thigh. He was leaning towards her, smiling and twirling a pen in between his fingers. No, she was dead. I just saw her die. I watched the tall coworker sob openly, her hand pressed against her swollen cheek. The red flower in her hair crumpled to the ground, blooming and withering, blooming and withering. That happened before. That happened days before. On the other side of the wall stood the man's mousy wife. She looked younger than she had the day before. She looked happy. Just then the tall girl entered the frame. She was wearing a tight, white dress that flared at the bottom and black stiletto heels. She was carrying a box full of papers and desk plants. The plants were coated in blood. No, that's not right. That's not how it happened. None of this was how it happened. The boss came out of his office and walked right up to the tall girl, extending his hand. She shook it with a feeble shyness, smiling down at her heels. He placed his hands on her slender neck and squeezed. The mousy woman laughed. The picture frame cracked. You always call on Fridays. I screamed and rushed over to my desk, tearing out pieces of notebook paper in my wake. I threw them on the ground and took out a pen, uncapping it with my mouth. I spit the cap out across the floor and took off my heels, falling to my knees. You always call on Fridays. You always call on Fridays. Friday. Today was Friday. Today was the day the tall girl died. The man was done with being coy because he took his hand and slid it all the way up the girl's tight dress, pulling her panties off in one quick motion. He put them around her neck. The mousy woman laughed. The picture frame wobbled on the desk. You always call on Fridays. Tuesday was when I first noticed them. Yes, it was Tuesday, but that wasn't the day they met. That was the day the tall girl was slapped. The mousy woman was now confronting another coworker, a man. He seemed to be in his late 30s with peppered hair and tan skin. His hand was on the tall woman's lower back, comforting her. The mousy woman took a knife and stabbed the tall girl's stomach. The knife's edge went through her back. Blood spurted between the man's fingers. I closed my eyes and tried to block out the office across the street. Thursday was when the mousy woman and man met the tall girl. She was wearing a white dress. Our first day. Then what? The seduction. The man was gently rubbing her thigh, all the while maintaining eye contact with the sheet of paper he had in front of him. The girl was playing coy too, leaning forward slightly to point out something on the paper. Her boobs bounced near his flushed cheek. The picture frame fell. The mousy woman sobbed. Yes, white dress was the first time they met. The seduction, the red dress, had to be the second event. The third, the tall girl sobbed openly. Her hand pressed against her swollen cheek. The red flower in her hair crumpled to the ground. Blooming. Yes, that's right. The timeline is coming together. But what about the fourth? That was the day she died. That was when she was pregnant. The events must have happened months before each other. The mousy woman lunged at the tall girl. In her hand was a large, shining knife that she had grabbed from under her keyboard. Oh, poor little Kate. Don't you know you always call on Fridays? I dialed 911 feverishly, the office coming in and out of focus. 911, what's your emergency? A smooth voice answered. I want to report a murder at 535 Boylston Street. A pregnant woman was just stabbed. I don't think she's alive anymore. Oh, Kate, the operator cooed. Of course she's not alive anymore. But how will you know for certain unless you check? You know you want to. You know you have to. Of course I have to. You always call on Fridays. I stumbled out of my office door, the dial tone still ringing in my ear. My office was dark and the carpet had been torn up. Wasn't the renovation supposed to happen next week? How long had I been in there? But it didn't matter. Down the elevator I went. The streetlights looked like stars. I wanted to climb up them, all the way up to the tippity top. But I couldn't. I had to see the office across the street. I had to get to them. The door wasn't locked to the 13th floor. I stepped across its threshold half expecting something to happen, but nothing did. The office looked like mine. The carpets were torn up like mine, but there was something different. The red flower on the floor, blooming and withering, blooming and withering. I walked closer to the light at the end of the office, the box heavy in my arms. Hi, it's so great to meet you. A mousy woman greeted me. My name is Karen. Hi Karen, I'm Kate, the new receptionist. I smiled back, shifting the box in my arms. We shook hands awkwardly. Oh, here, darling, you can put that here. Karen gestured to an empty desk. Relieved, I unloaded my box and straightened my white dress. Just then, a man in his mid-30s entered the room. He had tan skin and peppered hair. My heart leapt to my throat. He was much more handsome than I thought he would be. Why, now you must be Kate, he cooed. It's a pleasure to meet you. Our hands touched and I looked down shyly at my feet. I could tell I was blushing. Karen could tell too. My husband is a great boss, she said between tight lips. I'm sure you'll be happy here. He smiled, his fingers twitching in mine. I'm sure I'll never want to leave, I answered.
I'm a seasonal caretaker at a national park in Alaska. I won't say which one, because I still value my job and I've been warned by my employers to keep my mouth shut about anything unusual I've seen during my time here. That being said, there are some very strange things that I've seen over the last 3 years I've held this position, and I figured I'd share some with you. You may not even be aware of what a seasonal caretaker is, and that's completely understandable. Generally, it's not that exciting, if I'm being honest. I start my season when the park is closed for the winter, and it's my responsibility to make sure that the various cabins and public buildings are maintained, and the snow is kept clear from the roofs to prevent any damage. That sort of thing. It's a lonely job, and if you're a people person, it's probably not for you. It takes a bit of an odd duck to willingly put themselves into exile for 3 months at a time, knowing that there's no way out until the snow begins to melt, and the plows can start clearing some of the access roads that lead out to my cabin. I do have a snowmobile that I can use to take the 3-hour trip to the nearest ranger station if I need to. But it's not like a quick trip to the corner store. It's just fine for me though. I've always been a loner and I have Max, my Jack Russell Terrier, to keep me company. The job isn't very demanding. I typically only spend a few days each week tending to my responsibilities, and the rest of the time is mine to do with as I please. A few years ago, I took up nature photography as a hobby to pass the time, and I've even had a few of my pictures published by an organization you'd recognize by name. I have framed copies of those magazines hanging on the wall behind me right now, as a matter of fact. A lot of people come through this park during the more temperate months. It's probably one of the most popular places for outdoorsy folks to come explore in this region of Alaska. In the winter months, however, it's completely deserted except for a few lonely ranger stations and the like. I'll go for weeks at a time without seeing a soul, and the only person I speak with any regularity is my ranger buddy. We'll call him Rick, who I check in with a few times a week on the radio. Aside from that, it's just me and Max. I'm not sure how best to go about telling you about some of the things I've seen up here in the dark, frozen days of winter. So I'll just dive right in and tell you about the shades. At least, that's what I call them when I'm talking to myself. I have no idea what they really are, but when the winter storms are blowing strong against my shuttered cabin windows, and the visibility in the snow and dim light are next to nothing, you'll see them. It's almost like looking at someone moving behind a pane of frosted glass, all indistinct and shadowy. At first, I just thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, finding patterns in that chaotic static of all that falling snow. But then I started hearing them as well, like murmuring just loud enough to hear over the howl of the wind, but too quiet to recognize them as any sort of intelligent speech. It's enough to set you on edge, I can tell you that much. They tend to only show up during a heavy snowstorm, and the fiercer the storm, the closer they'll come to the cabin. It's gotten to the point where I make sure I've locked my doors and windows long before nightfall, if I know there is a storm coming. One time, during an especially nasty blizzard, I could actually hear them moving all around my cabin, like some sort of nightmare parade. That night was bad. At one point, I actually saw and heard the doorknob on my front door turning, all slow and deliberate, accompanied by what sounded like soft scratching at the wood surface. The worst of it, and I'll swear on a stack of Bibles that it's the truth, was the faint whispering voice that kept calling my name just on the other side of the door. That went on for an hour or more, and even now, if I close my eyes, I can still hear that cold, hollow voice. It's what I would imagine a person would sound like if their soul were ripped from their body. I suppose I'm being a little overly dramatic, but it's the only way I can describe it. Alive, but also lifeless. I don't know a better way to explain it. No reason to dwell on it, I guess. I will say that I'm not sure what would have happened if I hadn't remembered to throw the deadbolt that night, but I'm not interested in finding out. Just thinking about it makes me anxious. I mentioned it to Rick the next day after the storm had quieted, when I could get a radio signal out. I expected him to laugh at me for letting myself get all spooked by the dark, but he didn't. He very calmly and firmly told me that it was better not to talk about them at all, and to just make sure I kept myself locked up nice and tight when the heavy snowstorms came. I tried to prod him for more information, but he just refused to elaborate any further. The only thing he would add was that not everything sleeps when winter comes on up here. I have to admit, he creeped me out more than a little with that singer. He definitely knows something about them, and I'm going to try and pin him down one day and get more information. The next thing on the list is the car graveyard. I swear to you, if you explore far enough off the beaten trail out here, chances are pretty good you'll find one. A car or truck just inexplicably deposited in the middle of backwater Alaska. Like that makes any sense at all. The first one I ever saw was an early 2000s BMW coupe, looking like it was just off the showroom floor, except for the fact that half of it was embedded in an old spruce that had probably stood there since before the car even existed. It almost looked like the tree had grown around the car, or maybe the car had been interposed into the tree. I don't know how it's possible. I just know that it was there. I've seen a few of them during my time here, sometimes trapped in the trees like that BMW, and sometimes just sitting in the middle of an open space of ground. Every one of them looked like they were fresh off the road, and none of them had any logical way they could have gotten out there, even without the whole stuck in the trees part. The most unnerving thing about the cars, though, is the clothing. I've stopped looking and just tend to avoid going anywhere near one if I see it. But the first time I saw one, my curiosity led me to check it out. I tried to open the doors, but they were all locked. When I looked in through the windows, though, I saw the damnedest thing. In the front seats, it looked like someone had laid out clothes, pants, shirts, socks, shoes, the whole deal, and strapped a seatbelt around them. It was like the people in the car had just vanished in mid-drive, leaving their clothes behind just the way they'd been wearing them. Eerie is one word for it. But if I'm being honest, it scared the hell out of me. The other thing about the cars is that you won't find the same one twice. When I saw that first BMW, I came back out the next day with my camera to take a picture of it, but it wasn't there anymore. I thought I'd simply forgotten where it was, or that I'd gotten turned around. But when I saw my boot prints in the snow from the day before, I knew I was in the right spot. I tried to report this to the ranger as well, but Rick told me they wouldn't even send anyone out to investigate them anymore. By the time anyone got there, they'd be gone. Apparently, reports of this sort of thing have been coming in periodically over the last 20 or 30 years. And nobody knows anything about them. He did tell me that one of the rangers had found one once. A school bus from Texas, if you can believe that. In each of the rows of seats were piles of empty clothes. With the exception of the driver, the ranger that found it said that the driver was sort of there, but not really. Almost like a blurry hologram frozen in time. He said that the driver, an elderly man, looked like he was frozen in some terrified scream, all wide-eyed and gaping mouth. The ranger tried to get into the bus using the rear emergency door, but when he got the door open, a loud buzzing sound filled his ears, and a high-frequency vibration ran through his body like an electric shock. He said the closer he got, the more intense the sound and sensation became. Before he could even take a step inside the bus, it grew so strong that he thought he was going to pass out. The best he could describe it was like when you have two strong, opposing magnets that you're trying to push together. The more you push, the stronger the resistance becomes. He said it was almost like the universe was somehow keeping him out of that bus, like he didn't belong in it. He stumbled away from it and spent the next day in bed, sicker than a dog. When he came back out a few days later with some of the other rangers, the bus was gone. I can't really speak for the buzzing and vibrating personally. I just know that I avoid them whenever I see them. They're just not right. The last thing I'll tell you about today is the bridge. About a mile or so away from my cabin, along a maintained footpath, there's a rope bridge that crosses a deep ravine. To the side of it, there's a bit of a rock jutting out that's used as a kind of observation point. You know what I mean, where hikers will stop and take selfies along their trek to post to Facebook or Twitter or whatever. The Parks Department went through the trouble of installing handrails along the edge of it to prevent anyone from falling to their death. Of course, there aren't any hikers here during the winter season. The park is technically closed and all roads leading into the area are blocked by chains to prevent anyone from driving in and getting into trouble with no possibility of rescue. I hike down that path probably once a week, looking for new photo opportunities to occupy my time. It's a beautiful walk and the whole landscape seems so crisp and fresh without people tromping all around it. I've gotten some incredible shots of the bridge, but I don't dare step out onto it when it's this cold though. The boards are constantly frozen and slick with ice. I'm pretty sure it wouldn't take much of a misstep to fall on my ass and slide out from under the waist-high rope handholds. I'd be falling 200 feet to the rocks below before I even realized what was happening. Here's the weird part though. Inevitably, when I reach that bridge, I'll find multiple sets of footprints leading up to the rocky outcropping, but none of them leading away from it. They'll come from all different directions, some from the path and others straight out of the trees, but they all seem to stop at the edge of the ravine. They're various sizes and stride lengths, some of which are very small, and others are so large they have to have been made by some hulk of a person. The first time I saw them, I was afraid that some trespassers had gotten too close to the edge and fallen over. But when I spent the better part of my day making my way carefully to the floor of the ravine, I couldn't find any sign that anyone had been there besides me. I'll be the first to admit that I'm no tracker, but even I can tell when footprints in fresh snow lead up to a place and don't return. I've walked out onto that outcropping myself once to see if I could figure out where all these people had gone. Maybe there was a hidden path that I wasn't seeing, but the moment my foot touched that stone, my head began to throb like I was suffering from the worst hangover I'd ever had. When I staggered back from it, the pain disappeared like it had never been there, and I was left with a pretty instant nosebleed for the rest of the afternoon as my only souvenir. I didn't try again. Max won't even go anywhere near it. He'll start whining as soon as we start approaching that part of the trail. Mind you, this is a dog that I've had to, on multiple occasions, wrestle inside the cabin because he was so incensed that a pack of wolves dared wander too close to his territory. For all of his small stature, he doesn't seem to have the self-preservation gene that tells him when he should be afraid of something. But not the overlook though. That's a different story altogether. Even Max has his limits, I guess. I have more stories, but I'm getting a little tired and it's about time for me to get some sleep. Tomorrow, I need to head out to the cabins by the frozen lake and make sure their roofs are clear. I'll write more later. Next time I'll tell you about the dead bears. That's a strange one. A few days ago, I was out for a morning hike in my local forest, on a trail I had walked 100 times before. It's a 5-mile loop that passed by a creek, and it was just isolated enough to feel like a refreshing sojourn away from the suburbs without being too remote. It was a bit of a surprise to me when I came across a fence about a mile into my walk, right across where the trail normally continued. There was a sign that said something along the lines of "Government property, no trespassing," and I sighed in annoyance. I had been down on this very same trail nearly a week prior, and the fence and sign hadn't been there before. I almost turned around, but it was such a nice day, and the trail was so short. I figured it wouldn't be too big of a deal if I just hopped the fence and finished my hike. I could find another route the next time. I didn't see a security camera or anything else like that, so I simply hopped the fence and continued with my walk, annoyed that it may be the last time I would be able to hike on that trail. It's a beautiful area, and I stopped occasionally to listen to the birds or smell the fresh air. After about 2 miles or so, I reached the creek and decided to sit down and enjoy the view, as I took a swig from my thermos of hot tea, listening to the gentle burbling of the nearby stream. I'd almost forgotten about the fence. Out in the forest like this, I felt like I was one with the sublimity of nature. Everything was quiet, calm, and serene. After a few minutes though, I began to feel a little uneasy. It took me a moment to realize why. There were no birds singing. I hadn't noticed at first because the creek was so close by that it provided its own ambient noise. But once I was aware of the bird's absence, the silence was deafening. A couple years back, I had an experience with a mountain lion. It was on a different trail, but in the same general part of the state. I recalled that all the birds had gone quiet, instinctively silencing themselves in the presence of the beast. It had simply come down out of the bushes, walking across the trail before looking at me curiously. Luckily, I had managed to keep my wits about me, and succeeded in scaring off the cougar with a combination of yelling and flapping my jacket to make myself look bigger. As soon as it departed, the chirping of birds returned. After that day, I always carried a small air horn with me on my hikes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the air horn, looking around cautiously in search of anything that could be scaring off the birds. I didn't see anything, and was almost on the verge of simply pressing down on the air horn preemptively, when I heard a snap far away on my right. Turning cautiously, I strained my eyes to see what could have caused the noise. The air horn at the ready. Knowing what I do now, it is very possible that if I had chosen to use the air horn, I wouldn't be here to tell my story. Though at first, it blended in with the trees and brush. I noticed the deer rather quickly. I relaxed a little, exhaling in relief as I put the air horn back into my bag with a shaking hand. I still felt uneasy though. Even at this distance, I could tell that there was something off about the animal, and the birds still hadn't returned. Staying quiet and lying low, I grabbed my binoculars and took a closer look at the distant deer. It was a buck with a beautiful set of antlers. This already struck me as somewhat odd, as most of the bucks around here had already since shed their antlers at this point. Even odder, however, was the structure of the antlers. Rather than two large antlers with multiple points facing upwards, it seemed more like 6 to 10 spikes extending out of the skull. On further inspection, the deer was malnourished, emaciated even, with clumps of fur missing. As I watched, it hobbled feebly on unsteady legs towards the river, lowering its head to drink. My thought was that it must have been suffering from chronic wasting disease, perhaps coupled with a bit of mang. I felt sorry for the animal and, with sadness, continued to watch it through my binoculars. Then, its antlers twitched. It didn't look like they were going to fall off due to shedding, or anything like that. The points moved upwards slightly, like a hand unclenching from a fist. As soon as the antlers twitched, the deer stood up from its drink, eyes wide, almost as if it were standing at attention. As I watched, the now clearly articulated antlers further stretched, bending until the points touched the side of the buck's head. Then they began to push. As I watched in stunned horror, something ripped itself out of the deer's skull with a disgusting crack of splitting bone. The objects I previously thought to be antlers were, in actual fact, the spider-like legs of some sort of horrible monstrosity. My hands were shaking too much to get a clear view, but it was somewhat crab-like in appearance, with sharp mouth parts and beady black eyes. As soon as the creature pulled itself fully free from the skull, the deer's corpse fell down limply into the stream, its bright red blood polluting the fresh water. The antler thing scuttled off rapidly into the tree line, disappearing in an instant. As soon as it was out of sight, I ran as fast as I could down the trail, not stopping until I had jumped over another fence and got back into my car. When I finally arrived back home, I vomited on the side of the road. I called out of work for the next couple days, claiming that I was feeling ill, which, to be fair, I was. I have no possible idea what that thing was. All I do know is that I won't be going on any hike again anytime soon.
They gave me $1 million to keep my trap shut, and I did, for 15 years. But last night I was making the rounds, and I saw the professor again. I had a heart attack 3 years back, and I tell you, when I saw him standing there in front of room 204, I felt another one coming on. He turned and smiled, and it was like he hadn't aged a day in 15 years. "Hey there, Chief," he said. I dropped my clipboard on the ground and hightailed it out of there, never looking back. What I'm about to tell you is liable to make me sound crazier than a 3-horned goat, but I promise you, there's crazier things out there. The cops don't believe me. The official story is that the professor and those students died 15 years ago. Room 204 just up and exploded, they said. Damnedest thing. And there's some truth there. That room did explode, but it wasn't an accident. We knew exactly what we were doing, or we thought we did. They call me an assistant supervisor of maintenance, but really I'm a janitor, and always have been. You might wonder why I'm still at it after getting that $1 million. That dough is for Junior, so he doesn't have to go through the same stuff that I did. The night this happened, I was assigned to the Astrophysics Center, a bit northwest of the main Harvard campus. Until that night, this was always my favorite beat. I mean, God help you if you wound up at one of the biology labs. Those goddamn dead, cut open animals all over the place used to give me nightmares. And really, thinking back, I'd take those nightmares of mutilated and scattered organs any night over the stuff that has haunted me ever since. Anyway, I was there mopping the hallway on the second floor of the lab building when the door to room 204 opened up and this guy popped his head out. "Hey, you." I looked around to make sure he was talking to me. "Yes, can I help you, sir?" I thought he was going to complain about the room being a mess or something. "How'd you like to make $1,000, Chief? An hour's work at most. Easy money. Does that sound good to you?" It sure did. Things were tight at home, as they always were. 1,000 would knock off some of those long overdue bills. But I was also on a tight schedule. They didn't give you much breathing room. Don't want you standing around thinking about it all, I guess. That sounds great, sir, I said, but I got to stick to my beat. The man laughed. We're about to make history, Chief, he said, and you're worried about emptying the bathroom trash. Come on, don't sweat it, you won't get in trouble. I promise, I'm a professor here. I'll vouch for you. The guy did look like a professor with carefully combed gray hair and big old glasses on his face. I shrugged, leaned my mop against the wall, and said, sure, what do I have to do? That's fantastic. Come on in, Chief. Come on in. I followed him into the room. One look, and I should have just turned around then and there and told him to keep his damn money. But I didn't. As soon as I stepped in, I felt the little hairs all over my body stand up. I don't mean I was scared. I mean like there was an electrical charge in that room, and I had a guess about where it was coming from. There in the center of the room, on a round table, was a large glass globe, crackling with electricity, like what you see if you go into a kid's science museum. Like they somehow created a lightning storm in a glass ball. This one was sort of vibrating around on its stand and buzzing, and the lightning inside was black. I could feel the electricity coming from it from across the room. There were 4 kids there, students, I guessed, sitting in a row of chairs along one wall. More than sitting, they were strapped into those chairs, with metal things over their heads like those big bowl things you see at a hair salon. They all had their eyes closed. What's going on here? Those kids okay? They're quite fine, said the professor. As to what is going on, as I said, we are about to make history. We are going to open the first portal. Portal? I said, like in the movies. The professor laughed. I suppose so, Chief, he said. Now listen, we had a last-minute cancellation. But that's okay because it's an easy job. We're going to be kicking things off here shortly. And once they are properly kicked off, the portal will open. I will enter. If I am not back in 30 minutes, you are to pull that lever there, and this will close the wormhole. I looked to where he was pointing, at a big red lever attached to a giant, whirring machine that was hooked up to the metal bowls over the students' heads. But won't you be trapped on the other side of the wormhole? I asked. Not that I had the slightest idea about what the hell was going on. Chief, said the professor, we've got this down to 2 possibilities. 1. The wormhole opens up to what we're calling the second universe. The best way that I can explain this possibility is that there is a different reality that exists on the other side of this one, the other side of an invisible wall. The portal will provide a door in that wall, and the other possibility that the wormhole will open to a place that man was not meant to go. 30 minutes will give me enough time to get in and out if the first possibility is true, and if it's the second, then you'll close the hole with that lever and my students will destroy my work. This was all way above my pay grade and my head was spinning. Why only 2 possibilities? How the hell did they come up with those 2? And if this was real, why the hell would the professor take a coin toss chance of getting stuck in the place that man was not meant to go? I mean, those were just starter questions among the swarm that was buzzing around in my head. I see that you have some reservations, said the professor. I assure you that your only job is to pull that lever after 30 minutes. That's it, Chief. We'll take care of the rest. And anything that happens isn't on you. The documentation is quite in order. He tapped a folder that was sitting on the circular table. And here, I'll write you a check now, before we proceed. As he wrote out the check, I wondered if it would still be valid if he got swallowed up by the wormhole. I actually had that thought, as crazy as it sounds. It was still all so weird and abstract to me at that point. Here, he said, handing over the check. Let's do it, Chief. As soon as I enter that hole, give me exactly 30 minutes. On the dot. That's all you have to do. I took the check, mumbled a thanks, and watched as he walked over to the machine. He pulled the lever. There was a loud crackling sound, and I watched in unease as one by one, the students' eyes shot open. There were no pupils there, like their eyes were rolled back in their sockets. Hey now, I said, taking a step towards the machine. They are quite fine, said the professor. I assure you. Their jaws started to move like they were grinding their teeth. The professor took a jar of neon blue liquid from a shelf on the wall. He unscrewed the lid and poured the stuff over the electric globe on the round table. The thing started going crazy, and then the globe shattered completely, bits of glass flying through the air as shoots of black lightning zapped out into the room. I ducked down. I had had enough by then and was ready to get the hell out of there. Then it happened. A black hole appeared in the middle of the room, sucking in the bolts of electricity. It grew larger and larger until it took up half the room. All I could hear was this rushing sound, like the world's largest vacuum cleaner running at full throttle. "Remember, Chief?" shouted the professor with a wild look on his face. 30 minutes exactly. Then he stepped into the thing and was gone. At first my mind was a mess, staring at that whooshing black hole that seemed hungry to suck everything in. I looked at the kids hooked up to the machine. Their eyes rolled back, white holes, I guess they looked like, their jaws grinding away like crazy. It was too much to make sense of. I looked down at my watch. 15 minutes and 31 seconds had gone by since the professor got swallowed up by the wormhole. My heart was pounding, and I kept pacing back and forth, trying to work out what the hell was going on. Then I started to zero in on it. I was getting pranked, not a prank like we used to do as kids, setting dog poop on somebody's front steps and all that idiocy. I mean a prank like the sophisticated college folk do, where they tell you something's going on but the whole point is to just observe your reaction. A psychological experiment. Probably cameras in here watching me right now. See what I do. 12 minutes to go. I saw a trickle of blood come down from one of the kids' nose. I leaned down to look at him closely. He was shaking a little bit, all over. If I throw that lever, this will all probably stop. Maybe that was the test. I had to decide between trapping the professor in the black hole and saving the kids hooked up to the machines. None of it was real, of course, but they didn't know that I knew that. But then, screaming in the back of my mind was that voice. What if it is real? 10 minutes to go. The professor had promised me that the kids were alright. Another one started bleeding from the nose. If it wasn't real, it was a hell of a trick. Where did the professor go, if not through that black hole? I thought about touching it, but whenever I got close, I was filled with total terror. It sure seemed real, like it really took you someplace far, far away from here. I walked over to the table and picked up the folder that was there. Just like the professor had said, the first page was instructions to shut down the machine and destroy it if he didn't return within 30 minutes. I flipped that page over and the next one had a photograph of one of the students. I read what it said. It was a consent form. I, Jackson Stewart, acknowledge the possibility of my imminent death if I participate in this experiment. I am prepared to give my life to science. I flipped that page, and there were 3 more just like it. Now, I'm no lawyer, but there was no way in hell that this experiment was legal if it was real, even with those consent forms. So it probably wasn't real. And if it was, then the professor lied to me. He had said that the kids were fine. This folder was telling me something else. 2 minutes to go. I took a deep breath and paced the room, watching each second tick by. My mind was telling me that none of it was real, but my gut was screaming in horror. I just looked at my watch. It would be over soon enough, one way or the other. 30 seconds. I walked over to the machine and put my hand on the lever. God damn it, why is he cutting it so close? I watched the seconds tick by, and I didn't know if I could do it. I didn't know if I could risk trapping the professor wherever the hell he had gone off to. 5 seconds. My hand was shaking. 4 seconds. Sweat was pouring down my face, dripping into my eyes. 3 seconds. One of the students started to moan. The one that I saw was named Jackson in the folder. 2 seconds. Oh god, oh god, oh god. 1 second. Jackson started to shake. 0 seconds. Damn. I tensed my muscles to pull the lever. 1 look at Jackson, and I knew I had to pull it. He was violently jerking around now. Wait. I snapped my neck around to see the professor's head sticking out of the black hole. Wait, damn it. Then his shoulders were through. I turned back to Jackson. Blood was pouring out of his eyes. I'm almost through. A second kid started to shake. 1 more second. I looked to see that the professor was through. He was back in the room. Do it, he shouted. 2 things happened after that, at the exact same time. I heard a wet popping sound, and I watched as the wormhole disappeared, as though it was never there. But I had never pulled the lever. I slowly turned to look at Jackson. His head was gone. Judging by the bits of brain and splatters of blood on the bowl thing above his neck, his head had just exploded. The whirring of the machine gradually died down, and then it was silent. The 3 kids who were still alive stopped shaking and closed their eyes. A tragedy, said the professor, pointing at Jackson with the exploded head. But not for nothing. I've been there. I've seen it. Chief, I've seen it. I hunched over and puked. It was weird, but my first thought was, what a mess I'll have to clean up later. I don't know. I guess my mind had sort of shut down, and I was going on autopilot. I was the janitor. I cleaned up messes. That was all I knew. Then it hit me, the reality of what had happened. You liar, I yelled. You told me those kids would be okay. The professor put this sickening smug grin on his face. He would have been, Chief, had you pulled the lever at the 30-minute mark as instructed. You told me to wait. Did I? Yes, you idiot. I'm calling the police. I had a walkie clipped to my belt. It wouldn't get me the police, but it would get campus security. I reached for it and had it in my hand when I heard a groan behind me. I turned to see that it was one of the kids. They were waking up. I went over to unstrap them from the chairs. The first kid's eyes blinked open, and when she saw the professor, she started screaming. It's okay, I said. It's okay, it's all over. She kept screaming. Then the second kid woke up. He looked right at me with wide, terrified eyes. Get us out of here, he shouted. I'm working on it, kid, I said, fumbling at the straps. They were on tight. The third kid woke up. It's here, she said. It made it through. Everything's okay now, I said. Your friend didn't make it, I'm afraid, but it's over. I'll make sure the professor pays for what he did to you and your friends. The first kid was still screaming at the top of her lungs. Get us out of here, shouted the second kid again. The third kid looked me dead in the eyes, and in a totally calm voice said, That's not the professor. What? Of course it is, I said. What I saw when I turned to look at the professor will haunt me forever. The professor's mouth was twisting around at odd angles, like something was moving the lower half of his jaw randomly, or like he was trying to get a hair out of his mouth that kept jumping around. The veins on his neck bulged, then sunk back down, then bulged again so that they were thick as ropes. His wrists were rotating in ways they weren't supposed to rotate as his arms flailed around wildly. I had the first kid, the screaming one, free. She jumped out of the chair and ran to the door, but her legs were wobbly and she tripped over herself in the middle of the room. I went to work on the second kid, whipping my head around every second to look at the professor. It looked like there was something crawling around under his skin, something big. Get us out of here, the second kid shouted yet again. The first kid was still on the ground, screaming. I worked away furiously on the straps. If you believe in God, said the third kid, with an eerie calm, then pray. I took a glance at the professor, and that's when the first bone burst out of his chest. Through his suit, I call it a bone, but it was pure black and dripping with green slime. As for me, said the third kid, I do not believe that there is a God, not after what I have seen. The second kid was free and made a run for it. I scooted over to the third kid, but watched as the professor reached out an arm and grabbed the second kid by the top of his head. The professor gave one quick twist and let go. I heard a terrible snap and the kid slumped to the ground, dead. 3 more black bones came out of the professor's chest, dripping. He laughed and bent down to the first kid, who was still screaming as bones began to poke out of his back like a stegosaurus from hell. What is that thing? I asked, as I fumbled at the straps of the last kid. It does not belong here, said the kid. You don't say, I said, getting one strap free. But what is it? It comes from a terrible place, a place where there is nothing except pain, endless pain, incomprehensible to our minds. Great, I muttered as I noticed with a sinking heart that the screams from the girl behind me had stopped. Then I heard a wet crunch. I couldn't help it. I looked to see the professor tearing into that poor girl's throat with long black fangs, dripping in green slime. I turned back to the kid, almost done with the straps. Just a few more seconds. What's your name, anyway, kid? Claire. Claire, I said, my mind trying to stay focused. When I get you out of these straps, I want you to pick up this chair and throw it at that thing, okay? I'll do the same thing, okay? Then we make a run for it. Do you understand? Can you do that? I understand, said Claire. I do hope it works. I did hope it would work, too. We have to make it work. Claire, I said, yanking off the last strap. Come on. We stood up together, and I reached over to pick up a chair. I hurled it at the professor with all of my strength, and it shattered against his bone back. I heard a terrible shriek then and watched as Claire's chair followed behind. I grabbed Claire's arm with one hand and reached for my pocket knife with the other. The only way out of that room meant passing by the professor. We started running as I pulled the knife out and flicked it up. The professor stood, still shrieking, as the green slime mixed with the red blood from the kid's throat dripped down his chin. I took a wild stab at the professor's neck and connected. I kept running with Claire, leaving the knife stuck in the professor's neck, and made it to the door. I had my hand around the knob when I felt Claire pulling away from me. I looked back, helpless, as I saw the professor reach long black claws into her gut. I threw the door open and left her there. Good God, I left her there. I made it outside the lab building somehow. I don't remember how. My mind just sort of shut down as I ran like hell, I guess. I did have the presence to go around and lock all of the doors from the outside. Then I got on the radio to campus security. You guys need to get the police over to the Astrophysics Center as soon as possible. There was a massacre in there. The front door started to rattle, and I heard the god-awful shriek again. Repeat, said a voice over the walkie. Look, I said, call up Lawrence Summers, right now. That was the president of Harvard at the time, and I had seen his signature on the papers in that folder with all of the consent forms. Tell him that the wormhole experiment has gone way south. The rattling at the door stopped. I only prayed that that thing didn't figure out it could just break a window and crawl out that way. This is the janitor, right? Said a different voice on the other end of the walkie. Is this a joke? The wormhole experiment. Have you been drinking? Call Lawrence Summers. If you don't, I promise you that you'll never be able to live with yourself. Do it now. There was a horrible pause. I heard the professor trying the side door now, shrieking once again. 10-4. A fleet of black SUVs pulled up 2 minutes later. A team of heavily armed men jumped out and ran past me, breaking the windows and jumping inside. I heard a stream of gunfire and screams, so many screams, and the professor's horrible shrieks. After a while, it was quiet, and a second team of men jumped through the broken windows. I didn't hear any more gunfire. I felt a hand on my shoulder and whipped around. A man was standing there. I don't remember a single thing about what he looked like, but I remember our conversation. Tell me what happened, he said. I told him the full story, the same one that I've told you. We are prepared to give you a lot of money to sign an NDA. NDA, non-disclosure agreement. It means that you can never tell anybody about what happened here tonight. How much? $1 million. And a promotion. The man paused. You mean, you still want to work? Work here, after tonight? Somebody's gotta clean up the mess, I said. Fine, of course. And one more thing. And what's that? Asked the man. I want to know that this will never happen again. I want you to blow all of that stuff up and burn all of the notes, of course. And I want to watch, of course, said the man. And so I thought it was over, but it's not. Last night, I saw the professor again. He looked me right in the eyes, flashed that smug grin, and said, "Hey there, Chief." That's when I ran the hell out of there. The police don't believe me. I've sent a dozen emails to Lawrence Summers' assistants. I've called every number that I've found listed for him. I haven't heard anything back. I don't know who else to turn to. I'm afraid the professor is going to open the wormhole again, and I'm afraid this time he might bring his friends back with him.